Hey everyone. Welcome back to Super Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Fleur's grandmother and goblin Cursebreaker examined Harry at Triwizard and found 31 soul bindings placed since birth? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Weight of Invisible Chains. The medical examination was Madame Maxime's idea, officially. That was what the paperwork said, anyway, a standard Beauxbatons pre-tournament health assessment, filed with the ministry 3 weeks before the champions were selected, signed by 2 French healers and a Hogwarts governor who hadn't actually read it before initialing the bottom. Bureaucratic wallpaper. Nobody questioned it because nobody looked closely enough to question it, and that was precisely the point. The room they'd been given was on the 4th floor of Hogwarts, a disused classroom that smelled of chalk dust and old spell residue. The desks had been cleared to the walls. In their place sat 2 chairs, a low stone table covered in instruments that didn't look like anything sold in a British medical supply shop, and a goblin who had not smiled once since arriving at the castle gates 6 hours ago. Ragnarok Ironteeth stood 4 feet and 2 inches tall. He wore a black frock coat with silver clasps, carried a leather satchel that clinked softly when he moved, and had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen approximately everything the world had to offer and found most of it disappointing. 340 years old, senior Cursebreaker for the Gringotts High Vault Authority, fluent in 11 magical languages including 2 that were technically dead. He'd dismantled a soul cage built by Grindelwald in 1943 and charged the Allied magical governments double for the overtime. He did not find Hogwarts impressive. He found it structurally unsound and badly in need of goblin standard warding, but he kept that opinion to himself because he was here for one specific job and professional courtesy demanded a degree of restraint. The woman standing across the stone table from him was the reason he'd taken the job at all. Adelaide Delacour was, depending on who you asked, either the most dangerous healer in Western Europe or a pleasant elderly French woman who made extraordinary croissants. Both descriptions were accurate. She stood just over 5.5 feet tall, white-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of bone structure that made it obvious exactly where Fleur had gotten her face. She was 73 years old and looked 50. She wore deep violet robes that moved with her like water, and around her neck hung a pendant of twisted silver and amber that Ragnarok recognized as a seer's focus of considerable age and power. She was arranging instruments on the stone table with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Small crystal vials. A disc of hammered gold etched with diagnostic runes that Ragnarok recognized as pre-Norman French work, old, genuinely old, the kind of thing that should have been in a museum. A length of braided white silk inscribed in ink so fine it looked like hairlines. A shallow bowl of water that wasn't quite water anymore, something in it refracting light at wrong angles. Ragnarok watched her work and said, "Your granddaughter is certain the boy will cooperate?" Fleur said he would come. Adelaide did not look up from the table. Her English was accented but precise. He trusts her more than he trusts most people here, which is not saying a great deal, but it is sufficient. Hufflepuff and the Bulgarian will be straightforward. The Potter boy is the variable. All the interesting ones are. She finally looked up, and there was something in her dark eyes that Ragnarok respected, the look of a person who had sat with terrible knowledge long enough to stop being afraid of it. You've read the account from the vault access attempt in 91. Gringotts does not discuss client vault activity. Ragnarok. A pause. The account was flagged, he said. Unauthorized access patterns consistent with funds redirection. The flag was suppressed before it reached the High Vault Authority. We traced the suppression to a standing order attached to the Potter accounts that predates the boy's arrival at Hogwarts. He adjusted one of his silver clasps. That is why I am here personally rather than sending a junior operative. Someone has been managing that boy, Adelaide said quietly. And I want to know exactly how. The door opened. Fleur came in first. She was in Beauxbatons blue, her silver blonde hair loose, and she had the carefully neutral expression she wore when she was actually paying close attention to everything. Behind her came Cedric Diggory, looking politely curious and slightly wary of the goblin. Behind Cedric came Victor Crumb, who looked at Ragnar with the flat professional assessment of someone used to encountering strange things in the course of his work, and then at Adelaide with something closer to genuine wariness. And then Harry Potter came through the door. Adelaide looked at him the way she looked at all her patients, quickly, comprehensively, cataloguing. 14 years old. Small for his age, underweight in a way that suggested years rather than a recent illness. Round glasses with a small crack in the left lens that hadn't been repaired. Robes that were a size too large. Dark hair that appeared to have given up entirely on any relationship with a comb. A scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt, faded silver white now, that she had read about and seen photographs of, but that was still somehow different in person. It sat on his skin with a quality she couldn't immediately name. Like a word written in a language you almost recognized. His eyes, though. Green, striking, genuinely arresting. And behind them, the particular kind of watchfulness that belonged to children who had learned early that adults were not reliably safe. She knew that look. She had spent 50 years treating people who had it. Mimir, Fleur said, and kissed her grandmother's cheeks with a warmth that briefly made her look about 12. Thank you for coming. I was asked. Adelaide held her granddaughter's face in both hands for a moment, studying her. You look well. Hogwarts agrees with you more than you will admit. It is drafty and the food is excessive. And yet. Fleur's mouth curved slightly. Then she stepped back and made introductions with the brisk efficiency she used when she wanted to move things along. Cedric shook hands with everyone including Ragnar, which the goblin noted without comment. Victor nodded. Harry looked at Ragnar with straightforward curiosity and said, Are you actually from Gringotts? Senior Cursebreaker, Ragnar said. High Vault Authority. Ha. Harry considered this. Does that mean you've broken a lot of curses? Several thousand. Right. Harry looked at the instruments on the table with the expression of someone recalibrating their expectations of what the next hour would involve. Fleur said this was a health check. It is, Adelaide said. A comprehensive one. Standard Beauxbatons protocol before any high-risk magical competition. We check for pre-existing conditions, magical strain, hereditary vulnerabilities, active enchantments. She smiled at him, and it was a real smile. She'd learned long ago that false warmth was instantly detectable to people who'd had too little of the real thing. Nothing invasive. You will simply sit, and the instruments will do most of the work. Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur met his look with complete steadiness. She is the best diagnostic healer in France, she said. Possibly in Europe. Whatever she finds, you will want to know. Something in the way she said it, not reassurance exactly, more like a warning wrapped in care, made Harry look at the table again. Then he nodded and said, All right. Cedric went first. The process was elegant and surprisingly quick. Adelaide had him sit in the chair, held the braided silk across his shoulders, moved the gold diagnostic disc in a slow pass from crown to feet and watched what the instruments told her. The shallow bowl rippled in colors, healthy blues and golds, one thread of amber near his left knee suggesting an old Quidditch injury that had healed slightly wrong, two minor charm residues consistent with standard spell practice. Clean. Straightforward. The profile of a well-cared-for, well-trained young wizard. She noted everything without comment, bottled a small sample of his magical aura in one of the crystal vials, and thanked him. Victor was more interesting. He had the compressed, dense magical signature of someone who had trained intensively since early childhood, and there were 3 professional Quidditch conditioning charms running that she recognized as Eastern European sports healer work. All voluntary, all clean, all consented. The bowl showed deep, complex blues and a strong thread of dark red that was simply power, concentrated and directed. She asked him about the conditioning charms. He answered in precise, careful English. She made notes. Then Fleur sat, and Adelaide performed the assessment with the particular thoroughness of a grandmother who had also been a professional healer for 50 years, and who was absolutely not going to let those two identities interfere with each other during a formal examination. The bowl showed Fleur's Vila heritage in silver-white spirals threading through the blue of her trained magic, and Adelaide permitted herself a small private satisfaction at how settled and integrated it had become since she'd last assessed her granddaughter 2 years ago. Growing into it rather than fighting it. "Good," she said quietly, just for Fleur. Fleur sat a fraction straighter. Then Harry sat down. He sat the way someone sat when they weren't sure what to expect but had decided to simply go through with it, a kind of deliberate stillness that was really just held tension. Adelaide placed the braided silk across his shoulders, noting that he held himself carefully still and didn't flinch at the touch, which told her something. Then she lifted the gold diagnostic disc and began the pass. The disc began to glow before she'd moved it 6 inches. She slowed. Moved it more carefully. The disc was etched with 47 runes, each attuned to a different category of magical condition: health, strain, hereditary markers, active spells, residual curses, soul integrity, will binding. The last 12 runes on the outer ring were the most sensitive, designed to detect passive enchantments so thoroughly integrated into a person's magical signature that they no longer registered as foreign. The kind of enchantments that had been there so long they'd started to feel like furniture. All 12 outer ring runes were lit. Adelaide kept her face professionally neutral. Her hand, however, had stopped moving. Ragnarok appeared at her shoulder without being summoned. He'd been watching the disc from across the room and he was moving now with the quiet urgency of someone whose professional instincts had just fired at full alarm. He looked at the disc. He looked at the shallow bowl, where the water was doing something it hadn't done for any of the other 3. Instead of showing clean-colored threads, it was showing overlapping rings, layer on layer, like dropping stones in water, except the circles never faded and there were far too many of them. "Continue," he said, very quietly. Adelaide completed the pass. The disc glowed brighter with every inch. By the time she reached Harry's feet it was burning hot enough to feel through her gloves, and the outer ring runes weren't just lit, they were strobing, working harder than she'd ever seen this instrument work outside a controlled laboratory examination of a dark arts victim. She lifted the disc away. Set it carefully on the stone table. Looked at the bowl. The rings in the water, she counted them. 31. The room was quiet. Cedric and Victor were watching with the careful stillness of people who understood that something significant was happening even if they didn't know what. Fleur was looking at her grandmother's face, and something in what she saw there made the blood leave her own. Harry was looking at the bowl. "What does that mean?" he said. His voice was steady. Curious. The voice of someone who had learned that the appropriate response to alarming things was information gathering rather than panic. Adelaide looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at the bowl for a long moment. Then he reached into his leather satchel and removed an instrument that looked nothing like anything Beau's batons had provided, a thing of dark metal and stretched membrane, like a compass crossed with a small drum, with a needle of what appeared to be black crystal. He held it over Harry without touching him and watched the needle. It spun completely around 3 times before settling, vibrating finely, pointing at Harry's chest. "Potter," Ragnarok said, "what do you know about soul bindings?" Harry's brow furrowed. "Not much. We haven't covered them in class." "They are," Ragnarok said, with the care of someone choosing each word deliberately, "a category of enchantment that attaches itself to a person's magical core and soul matrix rather than to their body or environment. Some are benign, loyalty weaves, family protection bonds, heritage transfers. Some are not." He looked at the needle, which had not stopped vibrating. "The instrument is detecting 31 distinct binding signatures on your person. All of them active. All of them integrated to varying degrees with your core magical signature, which means they have been present for an extended period." He paused. "The oldest appears to be approximately 13 years old." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Since I was 1, Harry said." Since shortly after the night you survived the killing curse, Ragnar confirmed. Yes. Harry was very still. Adelaide watched his face, not the surface of it, but the small muscles around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way a person processes information that lands like a physical blow while simultaneously refusing to fall over. She had treated survivors of the worst things human beings could do to each other. She recognized the particular quality of stillness that meant someone was holding themselves together through sheer force of will while something enormous rearranged itself inside them. "Can you tell what they do?" he asked. "Some of them, from surface readings," Adelaide said. She moved the gold disc back to the table and picked up her notes. She'd been writing throughout, quick precise strokes. "There are behavioral influence bindings. These affect emotional responses, instinctive reactions, patterns of thought. There are loyalty constructs. These create feelings of trust and attachment toward specific individuals that are enhanced beyond what would naturally develop. There appear to be at least 3 power suppressors, which would restrict your access to portions of your magical core. And there are 2 I cannot immediately classify without deeper analysis, which concern me the most because unclassified bindings are usually the ones with specific designed purposes." Harry looked at her. "Someone built a cage inside me." "Yes," she said, "because he deserved the truth without softening. That is a precise description." Fleur made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Harry glanced at her. She was looking at him with an expression she wasn't bothering to manage, which for Fleur Delacour meant the feeling was significant. She was furious. Not the hot spitting fury of shock, but the cold particular anger of someone who recognizes a specific kind of wrong and has a framework for exactly how wrong it is. "Who could do this?" Cedric asked. He'd moved closer without apparently deciding to, and his voice had an edge in it that didn't usually live in Cedric Diggory's voice. 31 bindings on a child. Who could do that? Multiple people, Ragnar said. Examination of the signatures should tell us exactly which spellcasters contributed which bindings. The magical signature of a binding is as individual as a fingerprint. He was already making his own notes, the black crystal needle instrument tucked carefully back in his satchel. Some of these will have come from a single source. Others will show different magical signatures. We will know whose hands built this. When? Harry asked. Tonight, Adelaide said firmly. Ragnar and I will work through the night. By morning we will have a preliminary classification of all 31. I want to be here. Adelaide looked at him. He wasn't asking. There was no plea in it, no request for permission. It was simply a statement of intent from someone who had just been told that the interior of his own soul had been redecorated without his consent and was not prepared to be in another room while other people examined the results. It will be uncomfortable, she said. Some of the deeper readings require sustained proximity to the binding signatures. You will feel them being examined even though we will not be breaking or modifying anything tonight. It may be disorienting. I'll stay, Harry said. She nodded. Then stay. Cedric looked between Harry and the stone table with its alarming collection of instruments, then at Victor, then back at Harry. What do you need from us? He asked, and the question was so simply, genuinely meant that even Ragnar paused. Nothing tonight, Harry said. But, stay close tomorrow. He seemed slightly surprised by what he'd said, as if he hadn't planned to say it and wasn't entirely sure where it had come from. If that's all right. Yeah, Cedric said. Obviously. Victor looked at Harry with a consideration that had shifted from the professional assessment of a competitor to something more personal. He nodded once. It was not a small nod. Fleur crossed the room and sat in the second chair, the empty one, the one that wasn't diagnostic equipment and wasn't in the way, just close. Harry looked at her. You don't have to stay either, he said. I know, she said. He didn't argue. Cedric and Victor left just after 10 in the evening, after Adelaide had made them both swear, on their magical cores, in the formal French tradition that Ragnar vouched for in the Goblin legal framework, that they would speak of tonight's findings to no one until given leave by Harry himself. Both of them swore without hesitation. Then the door closed, and the room became a smaller, more serious place. Ragnar worked the way a master craftsman worked, with instruments that seemed to be extensions of his hands, making adjustments and readings with the economy of motion that came from centuries of practice. He moved around Harry slowly, the dark metal compass drum humming softly, and occasionally he made a sound that wasn't quite a word in any language Harry recognized but that made Adelaide look up sharply and nod. "Tell me what you're finding," Harry said, about 20 minutes in. Ragnar looked at him. Assessed him the way he assessed complex vault problems, not condescendingly, but genuinely calculating whether the person in front of him could handle the information at the speed he had it. He decided. "First tier," he said. "Behavioral surface bindings. These sit in the uppermost layer of your magical signature, attached to your emotional processing centers. I'm counting 7 of them. They regulate things like instinctive responses to authority figures, comfort levels with confrontation, feelings of unworthiness." He paused at Harry's left shoulder. "There is one here specifically that suppresses the impulse to seek legal or official help outside Hogwarts." He moved on. "And one here," he stopped at the right side of Harry's head, near the temple, not touching, "that dampens the instinct to question information from trusted sources. Not eliminates. Dampens. Makes it feel uncomfortable, slightly anxiety-inducing, to doubt what someone you've been enchanted to trust tells you." Harry sat very still. "So when I've felt like I shouldn't question Dumbledore," he said carefully, "that feeling itself might have been, partially manufactured," Ragnar said. "Yes." Something moved across Harry's face. Not anger yet. More like the particular expression of someone watching a map of a familiar landscape being redrawn and discovering that the roads they knew were wrong. "Second tier," Adelaide said, taking over smoothly, moving to Harry's other side with her gold disc held low and steady. "These are deeper. More structural. Power suppressors, I count 3. One is very old, the oldest of all the bindings actually, placed with considerable skill. It sits directly against your magical core and acts as a regulator, a governor. Like a valve on a pipe, you have full access to the pressure on one side of the valve. The valve itself is controlled externally." "How much is being held back?" Harry asked. Adelaide and Ragnar exchanged a glance. "We won't know fully until it's removed," she said. "But based on what the diagnostic disc is showing me in terms of core size versus access ratio," she paused, and her voice remained professionally steady, "conservative estimate would be 60 to 70% of your natural magical capacity has been inaccessible to you since approximately age 1. The number landed. Harry blinked. Said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, 60 to 70. At minimum, Ragnar said, without apology, because the truth didn't improve by being softened. Fleur, who had been silent in her chair for the last 40 minutes, said something brief and emphatic in French that was not suitable for polite company. Then she looked at Harry and said, "I am sorry." "I should not, no," Harry said. "That sounds about right actually." He exhaled slowly. "Carry on." The third tier took longer to map. These were the bindings Adelaide had described as concerning, the ones without immediate clear classifications. Ragnar spent the better part of an hour on them, switching between instruments, occasionally asking Harry to do something simple, raise his wand hand, visualize a specific memory, attempt a wandless candle lighting. Each time Harry did these things, the instruments recorded the results and Ragnar watched with the focused intensity of a surgeon and the patience of a geological formation. The candle didn't light wandlessly. Harry frowned at it. It still didn't light. "Third power suppressor," Ragnar said to Adelaide. "See the interference pattern on the ambient discharge reading?" "Yes. It's targeting wandless specifically." Adelaide was writing quickly. "Fascinating. This was designed by someone who understood that wandless ability would develop independently of wand-channeled power. They built a specific suppressor for it." "Who does that?" Harry asked. Someone who understood your potential, Adelaide said. Someone who knew, even when you were an infant, that you would eventually develop wandless capability significant enough to require specific suppression. Someone who was afraid of what I'd be without the cage, Harry said. Neither of them denied it. The night deepened. Fleur brought tea at some point. She'd slipped out and returned with a tray from somewhere, which said interesting things about her relationship with Hogwarts house elves, and Harry drank his without tasting it, watching the instruments, asking questions, receiving answers. His questions got sharper as the night went on. More specific. He was building a picture, assembling it piece by piece, and the picture that was assembling itself was not one that Harry had ever had the framework to imagine before tonight. Around 2 in the morning, Ragnarok found the loyalty constructs. There are 5, he said. These are the most technically sophisticated bindings on the list. Whoever built these knew what they were doing at a level that goes beyond competent curse work. These are architecturally elegant. He didn't say it with admiration. He said it the way a security specialist describes a sophisticated lock on someone else's vault. They are attached to specific people. The construct is designed to enhance attachment, trust, and loyalty toward the specified individual beyond what would naturally develop, and simultaneously to subtly erode critical examination of that individual's actions and decisions. Who? Harry asked. We need the signature analysis to identify who placed them, Adelaide said, and we need specialized work to determine which specific individuals each one is keyed to. We don't have that yet. Tomorrow. But one of them, Ragnarok said, is keyed to Hogwarts itself. Not a person. The institution. And one, he paused, with the brief pause of a professional encountering something unexpected, appears to be keyed to a magical bloodline. Which bloodline? Adelaide asked. Weasley, Ragnarok said. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. Harry went very still in his chair. That doesn't mean, Adelaide began. I know, Harry said. He said it quickly, and then again, more slowly, I know. It doesn't mean they're not, it doesn't mean the friendship isn't real. He was working through it visibly, out loud, refusing to let himself simply react. But it means I can't know what's real and what's constructed. Not until they're off. That is correct, Ragnarok said. All of them, Harry said. All 31. I want them all off. That is a longer conversation, Adelaide said. Some can be removed quickly. Others are deeply integrated and will require care, time, proper preparation. A few, she glanced at Ragnarok, the 2 that are still unclassified, those we will not touch until we understand them completely. Removing an unclassified binding without understanding its function can cause significant harm. How significant? Soul fracture is the outer range, Ragnarok said flatly. The inner range is unpredictable magical discharge or emotional collapse. These are not bindings I will rush. Okay. Harry nodded. Okay. How long for the safe ones? Weeks. Possibly 2 months for the full removal of everything we currently understand. Adelaide set down her pen. And Harry, when the power suppressors come off, you will feel it. Quite dramatically. Your magical core has been compressed for 13 years. When that compression releases, it'll be like a dam breaking, Harry said. Something like that, yes. Harry looked down at his hands. Ordinary-looking hands, a bit ink-stained, the knuckles slightly rough from years of outdoor Quidditch practice and whatever else 14-year-old boys did with their hands. The hands of someone who had fought a basilisk, 100 Dementors, had pulled the sword of Gryffindor out of a hat, had been in a kind of danger that should by all rights have not left him standing. With 60 to 70% of his magic locked behind a constructed valve. Merlin, he said softly, and it wasn't a curse. It was something closer to wonder. Adelaide sat down across from him. The fire in the restored fireplace had burned down to low orange coals, and in its light she looked both older and more formidable, the healer-seer she actually was rather than the pleasant French grandmother she allowed people to see. "There is one more thing," she said. "Something I found in the baseline scan that I held back because I needed to confirm it, and I have now confirmed it." Harry looked at her steadily. "Tell me." "The scar," she said. "You know it is the point of impact of Voldemort's killing curse. What you may not have been told, what the diagnostic disc is showing very clearly, is that the scar is not simply scar tissue. There is something in it. A presence. A fragment of magical consciousness that is not yours." She held his gaze without flinching. "I believe, and Ragnarok agrees, that a piece of Voldemort's soul is embedded in your scar." Harry's face did something complex that wasn't quite expressible in simple terms. It passed through several things rapidly: horror, revulsion, a horrible kind of recognition, as though some part of him had always known something was wrong there, had felt the wrongness of it in nightmares and inexplicable connections without having a name for it. Then it settled into the same focused stillness that had defined how he'd handled everything else tonight. "That's number 32, he said. "It is not technically a binding," Adelaide said carefully. "It is I'm counting it anyway," Harry said. "Can it be removed?" "Yes," Ragnarok said. "I've seen it done twice in 300 years. Both cases were different from yours, different manner of implantation. But the principle is the same. It can be removed. It must be removed by someone who understands the theoretical basis of a Horcrux, which is what this is, Mr. Potter. An accidental one, created when Voldemort's curse rebounded through his own soul, which was already unstable. But a Horcrux nonetheless." Harry absorbed this for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and said, "Add it to the list." Outside, Hogwarts was entirely dark and entirely quiet. The castle breathed its old stone breath around them, and somewhere a clock struck 3 in the morning, and Harry Potter sat in a firelit room with a goblin cursebreaker and a Vila healer-seer and a girl who had stayed without being asked to, and he looked at the list of 31 bindings and the thing in his scar and felt, for the first time in his life, something that was almost relief. Because a cage you can see is a cage you can start to take apart. Fleur crossed from her chair to the stone table, looked at Adelaide's notes, and then looked at Harry. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Not what should be done, not what was advisable or prudent. What do you want to do?" "I want to start tomorrow," he said. "Whatever we can safely start, we start tomorrow." Adelaide nodded. Ragnarok was already making a new list. "There is also the matter," Ragnarok said, without looking up from his writing, "of who is responsible. Several of these signatures are identifiable without further analysis. I recognized 2 of them immediately." He did look up then, and his ancient yellow eyes were level and completely without sentiment. "I have been a cursebreaker for 300 years, Mr. Potter. I know the magical signature of Albus Dumbledore the way I know the grain of a familiar wood. And 3 of the bindings on your person, including one of the loyalty constructs and the oldest power suppressor, were placed by him." The fire crackled. "How many others?" Harry asked. His voice was extraordinary, not shaking, not breaking, simply asking, simply needing to know. "At least 4 other identifiable signatures," Ragnarok said. "We will confirm them by morning." Harry nodded slowly. He didn't look away from Ragnarok. "Is taking them off illegal?" "Placing them was illegal," Ragnarok said. "Under both British magical law and the International Confederation's Charter of Magical Rights, Article 14, no soul binding may be placed on a minor without the consent of their magical guardian. Article 15, no power suppressor may be placed on any witch or wizard without their fully informed consent regardless of age." He tilted his head. "Removing them is not only legal. It is required, under those same articles, once they have been identified." "Then we're covered," Harry said. "We are covered," Ragnarok agreed. "And those who placed them are not." The fire burned lower. Adelaide watched Harry process the last hour the way she had watched him process the entire night, not running from any of it, not collapsing under the weight of it, but taking it in with the particular quality of a person whose resilience had been tested so often it had become structural. Built into the bones. She thought about what he would be when the 31 chains came off. She thought about the 60 to 70% currently locked behind the oldest binding in Dumbledore's handwriting, metaphorically speaking, and she thought about the wandless suppressor specifically built because someone had known that eventually there would be power there too. She thought about the green eyes and the scar and the boy who had been put in a cage before he could walk and had still, somehow, managed to be magnificent. "Get some sleep," she said, gently. "What we have found tonight cannot be undiscovered. It will be here in the morning. Everything will be here in the morning, and we will begin." Harry stood. Stretched slowly, as if checking that his body still worked in the expected ways. Then he looked at Adelaide, and for just a moment the focused steadiness slipped enough to show what lived underneath it, something young and tired and utterly shaken, trying very hard not to be. "Thank you," he said. For looking. For not just writing it down and handing it to someone else." "You are welcome," she said. He looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok met his eyes. "Get some sleep," the goblin said, which from him was approximately equivalent to a long speech about solidarity and shared purpose. Harry almost smiled. He turned toward the door, and then stopped, because Fleur had fallen asleep in her chair. He stood there for a moment, looking at her, silver hair loose over the blue of her school robes, face relaxed in sleep in a way it almost never was when she was awake, brow smooth and expression unguarded. She had stayed the entire night without once making it about herself, without performing concern or manufacturing closeness. Just stayed. He took off his outer robe and draped it over her. Adelaide watched him do it and said nothing. But she made a small note, separate from her medical notes, in the private journal she had kept for 50 years of practice, in which she recorded not diagnoses but the moments that told you who someone actually was. Harry Potter, 14 years old, with 31 chains on his soul and 60% of his power behind a locked door, covered a sleeping girl with his robe and left the room. She wrote, "The chain makers did not understand what they were trying to contain." She underlined it. Chapter 2, What the Vault remembers. The sun came up over Hogwarts like it hadn't gotten the memo about what had happened the night before. Harry stood at the window of the 4th floor classroom at 6 in the morning, watching the lake turn from black to grey to a cold autumn gold, and thought about 60%. He'd slept for 3 hours in a spare room Fleur had found, she'd woken somewhere around 4, found his robe across her shoulders, and had a very brief, very quiet argument with him about whether he should sleep before she won it through the simple expedient of pointing out that Ragnarok and Adelaide were still working and didn't need him hovering. He'd gone. He'd lain on a narrow bed in a room that smelled of disuse and old stone and stared at the ceiling and done arithmetic. 60% locked away. 13 years. He'd performed magic his whole Hogwarts career, had done things people called remarkable, exceptional, beyond his years, and that had all been the 30%. The fraction that slipped through the valve. He thought about the basilisk. The Patronus against 100 Dementors. 3rd year on the broomstick in that storm. Every difficult spell, every moment in class where something had clicked and felt almost easy, all of that was the small amount they'd left him. The thought didn't make him feel powerful. Not yet. It made him feel something closer to vertigo, the way it felt to look over a ledge and realize the drop is much further than you'd understood. Then it made him angry. Quietly, comprehensively, in a way that didn't burn hot and fast but settled into him like heat into stone, the kind of anger that doesn't go away because it's correct. The door opened behind him and Ragnarok came in carrying 2 cups of something that steamed and smelled faintly of iron and herbs, and Harry thought that whoever had told him goblins weren't considerate had clearly never spent a night doing crisis work with one. "You didn't sleep," Harry said. "I don't require much." Ragnarok set 1 cup on the windowsill beside Harry. Goblin physiology. 3 hours in a 72-hour cycle is adequate for sustained concentration work. He looked out the window at the lake, then at Harry. "I have the signature analysis." Harry picked up the cup. Whatever was in it tasted like very strong tea crossed with something else, something with a slight mineral edge that felt steadying rather than unpleasant. Tell me. 11 distinct magical signatures across 31 bindings. Ragnarok opened a small leather folio, pages covered in his cramped precise script. 5 bindings from a single source, the dominant contributor. 3 from a second source. 2 from a third. The remaining 21 are distributed across 8 further signatures, ranging from 1 to 3 bindings each. Who's the dominant contributor? Ragnarok looked at him with the directness of someone who had decided before this conversation that Harry Potter deserved every truth at full speed. Albus Dumbledore. 5 bindings. The oldest power suppressor, 1 loyalty construct, 2 behavioral influence bindings, and 1 of the 2 unclassified bindings. Harry nodded. He'd known it was coming since last night, but knowing something is coming doesn't fully prepare you for the moment it arrives. He took a slow breath and kept looking at the lake. Second source, he asked. 3 bindings, 2 behavioral influence and 1 loyalty construct. Ragnarok paused. The signature matches records in Gringotts' magical registry for one Molly Weasley, née Pruitt. The cup in Harry's hands was warm against his palms. She placed a loyalty construct, he said. Keyed to her family line. Which corresponds to the Weasley keyed construct I identified last night. Harry processed this with the focused deliberateness he'd been applying to everything since midnight. Molly Weasley, who fed him like he was starving, which, fair enough, he often had been. Molly Weasley who hugged him at King's Cross every year and called him dear and made him feel something adjacent to what he imagined having a mother felt like. Molly Weasley who had placed a loyalty construct on his soul. Did she do it herself? Harry asked. Or was she also bound somehow? Is there a possibility she was coerced? Ragnarok tilted his head slightly. Not with surprise exactly, but with the acknowledgement of something unexpected. That, he said, is a more sophisticated question than most people would ask in your position. I don't want to be wrong about her, Harry said. If she was made to do it, that changes what it means. If she did it freely, that changes what it means differently. I need to know the difference before he stopped. Before I decide how I feel. Legitimate concern, Ragnarok said. The answer is I don't know yet. Gringotts has records of vault activity and some magical correspondence, but accessing the context of a casting requires different methodology. It is possible she was directed to do it, the timing of her binding and Dumbledore's are close enough in date that instruction seems more probable than coincidence. He made a note. I will pursue it. Thank you. Harry drank from the cup. Third signature. Petunia Dursley. Harry turned from the window. Your maternal aunt, Ragnarok said. 2 bindings. Both behavioral. 1 suppresses instinctive magical self-expression, which in early childhood would have prevented accidental magic from manifesting at observable levels. 1, he looked at his notes, is a shame construct. It attaches feelings of wrongness, abnormality, and social anxiety to magical ability and magical identity specifically. The silence in the room was of a different quality now. Harry set down the cup. He stood with his back to Ragnarok for a moment, looking at the lake, and said nothing. Adelaide came in quietly from somewhere, she'd clearly been listening from the corridor, and she'd brought her notes, and she stood near the door without trying to manage the moment. She's a muggle, Harry said finally. Petunia's a muggle. How does a muggle place a soul binding? She didn't cast it, Ragnarok said. The magical work is too sophisticated for an untrained witch and impossible for a muggle. She was the conduit. The blood anchor, the binding used her relationship to you, her blood proximity, as a delivery mechanism. Someone else wrote the spell and used her proximity to you as the vehicle. Dumbledore, Harry said. The construction style is consistent with his methodology, Ragnarok said carefully. I cannot state it as fact without further analysis. But the aesthetic of the casting, the structural choices, yes. Consistent. Harry turned back around. His face had settled into something that was very flat and very clear, the way still water looks flat and clear when it's deep. He used her hatred of magic as a weapon against me, Harry said. Neither Adelaide nor Ragnar contradicted him. The shame binding, he said. That's why I never, even with the Dursleys, even when they were at their worst, some part of me always felt like I deserved it. Like magic was something to apologize for. I'd do accidental magic and feel like I'd done something wrong. He paused. That was him. That was the binding, yes, Adelaide said quietly. Which he put there. Harry's voice was level. Through my aunt. Using her as a vehicle without her consent either, probably, which is, that's, he stopped. Looked at the ceiling for a moment. Right. Okay. He exhaled. What else? All 11 signatures. Ragnar went through the rest methodically. 2 bindings from a signature that matched the late Peter Pettigrew, both minor behavioral influencers, both apparently placed the same night as the oldest Dumbledore binding, and these ones Ragnar thought might actually have been placed by Voldemort's instruction rather than independent initiative, which raised its own category of questions. 1 binding from a signature matching Severus Snape, a monitoring binding, passive, that sent a signal when certain emotional states or magical signatures spiked. Not controlling, exactly. Surveillance. He's been watching my emotional state, Harry said. And your magical output levels, Ragnar confirmed. The monitor is calibrated to alert when your magic exceeds certain thresholds. So any time I've done something powerful, he's known. Immediately. Harry thought about the look Snape gave him in potions sometimes. The particular narrowing of those dark eyes when something went unexpectedly right. He'd always read it as resentment. Perhaps it was also calculation. The remaining signatures were smaller, some single bindings, some pairs. 1 matched the late Lily Potter, a protection binding of goblin-recognized legitimate type, almost certainly placed with full consent and love, which was so different in character from everything else on the list that it stood out the way a real painting stands out among photographs. It was the only binding on the list that had been placed with unambiguous care rather than control. Hers stays, Harry said immediately, and Ragnar made the note without comment. 1 matched James Potter, a heritage binding, the kind traditionally placed by fathers to pass on family magical characteristics and bloodline gifts. Also legitimate. Also staying. 1 signature, Ragnar said, I cannot identify. It matches no record in Gringotts magical registry, which is unusual. I have been doing this for 300 years and I have never encountered a signature that does not appear in our registry, Ragnar said. Every witch and wizard in Britain who has performed significant magic is in the registry. The fact that this one is not tells me either that it belongs to someone who has never performed magic in Britain, he paused, or that the registry entry has been deliberately obscured or removed. Which is possible. For someone with sufficient access to Gringotts systems. Ragnar's expression did something complicated. Theoretically impossible. In practice, if the right people were involved and the right palms were, Gringotts does not accept bribes. But 300 years of service have taught me that, impossible, is frequently a failure of imagination. He closed the folio. I will investigate the missing signature through different channels. Adelaide moved to the stone table, which she'd reset during the night while Harry slept, and began preparing the instruments for the morning's work. The early light through the windows made the shallow bowl gleam, and the gold diagnostic disc caught the sun and threw small patterns of refracted light across the ceiling. What are we starting with today? Harry asked, coming to stand on the other side of the table. The surface behavioral bindings, she said. The 7 in the first tier. These are the most accessible and carry the least risk of complication. They also, she looked at him directly, will produce the most immediate and noticeable subjective change. Once these come off, you will think differently. More freely. The filter that's been placed on your critical reasoning regarding authority figures will be gone. That sounds like an improvement. It will feel strange, she said. When you've been seeing through tinted glass your whole life and the glass is removed, the light seems too bright. Ideas you've been unconsciously steering away from will become accessible. You may find yourself angry at things you previously accepted without question. She held his gaze. That anger is legitimate. Try not to let it overwhelm the clarity. I'll try, Harry said. Also, Ragnar said, from the window where he'd remained, once the behavioral bindings come off, Snape's monitoring binding will detect the shift in your magical signature. He will know something has changed. Harry looked at him. How quickly? The monitor sends a passive signal at each shift. He could notice it by this evening. Then he'll tell Dumbledore. Likely. Harry stood with that for a moment. Adelaide watched him think. She could almost see it, the options moving behind those green eyes. Good, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. I want Dumbledore to know something has changed, Harry said. I want him to start wondering. Not today, I'm not ready to have that conversation today. But I want him to know, somewhere in the back of his head, that something has moved. He met Ragnar's eyes. Can we make the shift signature look smaller than it is? So Snape sees a minor fluctuation and not the whole picture. Ragnar was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. Shielding the removal process is possible. It would require an additional working, but I have the materials. Do it, Harry said. I'll have that conversation with Dumbledore when I'm ready for it. Not when he's ready for it. Ragnar made a note with the satisfaction of a craftsman encountering a client who understands the work. The door opened. Fleur came in, no longer in yesterday's robes, her hair tied back and her expression carrying the particular alert energy of someone who had slept hard and woken with purpose. Behind her, unexpectedly, were Cedric and Victor. We said we'd stay close, Cedric said, when Harry looked at him. He held up a paper bag. And we brought breakfast, because I don't know what's happening today but it seems like the kind of thing that should involve food. Victor was carrying tea. Properly, efficiently, without spilling any, which Harry found immediately credible. How did you get in here without people seeing? Harry asked. Victor has a very good glare, Cedric said. Nobody questions it. Victor's expression didn't change. I told the portrait at the 4th floor landing that I was lost. It gave me directions for 11 minutes. He set the tea down on a cleared corner of the stone table. It enjoyed the conversation. Harry almost laughed. It came out more as an exhale that was close to a laugh. Fleur was already talking to her grandmother in quiet rapid French, reviewing the night's notes. Cedric sat on a cleared desk and began distributing food with the calm competence of someone who had grown up in a household that believed problems were more manageable on a full stomach. Ragnar regarded the assembled group with an expression that was not quite exasperation and not quite approval. The removal working requires silence and sustained concentration from myself and Madame Delacour, he said. This is not a spectator event. We're not here to watch, Cedric said equably. We're here in case something goes wrong and someone needs to go get help. Or in case Harry needs, I don't know, someone who's not doing the magical surgery to just be present. Ragnar looked at Harry. They stay, Harry said. The goblin went back to his preparations. The process of removing the first tier of behavioral bindings was nothing like Harry had imagined. He'd imagined something dramatic, bright light, a sensation like tearing, perhaps pain. What it actually felt like was closer to the moment when you realize you've been unconsciously holding your breath, and you let it go, and your whole chest suddenly has more room. Adelaide worked with the braided silk and the gold disc, following precise instructions that Ragnar provided in a low continuous murmur, and Harry sat absolutely still in the chair and felt things, very subtle, at first. A loosening at the edges of his thoughts. Like a door that had always been slightly stuck was now moving on well-oiled hinges. The first binding lifted around 9 in the morning. Harry felt it go. He couldn't have described exactly what it felt like except that something that had been a fixture of his interior landscape simply wasn't there anymore, and in its absence the landscape looked different, more spacious, the way a room looks larger when you remove furniture you'd stop noticing. The authority suppression binding. He didn't immediately feel flooded with rebellious rage against Dumbledore. It was subtler than that. He felt, instead, a sudden clarity about the number of times he'd accepted the old man's decisions without question and what that had cost him. Third year, Sirius could have been freed with proper testimony and legal process, and Harry had never once questioned why Dumbledore didn't pursue that. The Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore had been removed from the school and Harry had never, not once, asked why he didn't simply come back and deal with it rather than leaving a 12-year-old to manage. First year, the Mirror of Erist, the Philosopher's Stone, 11-year-old children put in the path of a resurrected Dark Lord. Harry, Adelaide said quietly. Stay with us. He refocused. Breathed. Filed the thoughts for later with the organizational efficiency he developed for things that needed processing but not right now. By 11 in the morning, 6 of the 7 surface behavioral bindings had been removed. Ragnarok called a halt before the 7th. This one is more deeply integrated than the others, he said. It's the shame construct from the Dursley binding. It has roots that go down into the second tier, tendrils attached to the power suppressors. We remove it without preparation and we risk pulling on the suppressor structure before we're ready to handle the release. How long to prepare? Harry asked. 2 days, Ragnarok said. Possibly 3. We need specific materials I do not have with me. I will send to Gringotts today. He looked at Harry with a consideration that was its own kind of respect. How are you feeling? Harry thought about it honestly. Lighter, he said. Clearer. Like, have you ever cleaned your glasses and then been surprised by how much dirt was on them before? I do not wear glasses. Metaphorically. Metaphorically, Ragnarok said, yes. I have removed bindings from people before. The description is consistent. Harry stood and moved around the room, restless now in a way he hadn't been while sitting. The others had maintained their promised quiet throughout the working, Cedric reading, Victor sitting with his arms crossed and his eyes occasionally flicking to the proceedings with careful attention, Fleur making notes of her own in a small book she'd produced from somewhere. Now they were watching him move. Say what you're thinking, Fleur said. Harry stopped moving. Looked at her. Dumbledore put me with the Dursleys, he said. Deliberately. He wrote about it, I've seen the letter he left. He chose them, specifically, knowing what they were like. I mean, he had to have known what they were like. He knows everything about everyone. He chose them and then he used Petunia as a vehicle for bindings designed to make me feel bad about being magical. Yes, Fleur said. Why would he want that? What's the purpose of making me feel ashamed of magic? Control, Adelaide said from the table, not looking up from her notes. A child who is ashamed of their own nature is a child who will not explore it, will not seek training outside approved channels, will not develop confidence in their own magical judgment. A child who feels abnormal is a child who is grateful for belonging. Grateful children do not question the terms of their belonging. The room was very quiet. He wanted me grateful, Harry said. He wanted you manageable, Adelaide said. Grateful is a subset of manageable. Cedric set down his book. Victor uncrossed his arms. Neither of them said anything, but the quality of their attention had shifted from supportive background presence to something more actively present, the way people lean forward when the conversation reaches the thing it was always actually about. There's something else, Harry said. He was thinking out loud now, and the thinking felt different without the authority-questioning suppressor, more direct, more willing to follow an uncomfortable idea to its end. The first task. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm supposed to be in it. I was put in this tournament by someone, we all know it wasn't me, my name coming out of the goblet had to have been manipulated. Someone put me in. And Dumbledore, he stopped. Didn't fight very hard to get you out, Cedric said quietly. Didn't fight at all. Harry looked at Cedric. You saw it. That night with the goblet. He was upset, he looked upset, but he didn't do what you'd expect someone to do if a 14-year-old they genuinely wanted to protect had just been entered into a lethal competition. What would you expect? Victor asked. I'd expect him to go to war with the ministry to get my name withdrawn, Harry said. I'd expect him to call in every favor he has, and he has plenty, to get the rules changed. I'd expect him to be furious in a way that resulted in action rather than just, he gestured, grave concern and heavy sighing. He accepted it, Fleur said. Her voice was precise. Very quickly. For a man of his influence. Because he wanted me in it, Harry said. Didn't he? There's some reason he needed me in the Triwizard tournament and I don't know what it is yet, but, there's a plan. There's always a plan. He exhaled. And I've been walking around inside his plan my entire life and never seen the edges of it because I was bound not to look. Adelaide finally set down her pen and turned to face him fully. You are reasoning very clearly for someone who has had 6 behavioral constraints removed from their cognition in the last 3 hours, she said, with something that was precisely calibrated to be neither condescension nor excessive praise, but simply honest acknowledgement. I've had a lot to think about, Harry said. Yes. She stood. Ragnarok and I need to communicate with Gringotts and arrange the materials for the next stage. That will take several hours. I suggest you eat properly, sleep if you can, and spend some time simply, being in your own head. Without tasks. The 6 removed bindings will continue to integrate for the next day or so. New pathways will consolidate. Don't force it. What about the task? Harry asked. The first task is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks is sufficient time to remove the first and second tier bindings safely, Ragnarok said. Including the power suppressors, if the integration proceeds normally. He picked up his satchel. When the suppressors come off, 3 weeks should also give you some adjustment time before you are required to perform under pressure. 60 to 70% returning all at once, Harry said. How do I? You don't need to control it immediately, Adelaide said. You need to let it settle. Think of it as, a limb that has been in a cast for 13 years. When the cast comes off, you do not immediately run a race. You learn to walk again first. But the muscle was always there. It never went away. It simply needs to remember. Harry nodded. He picked up a piece of bread from Cedric's paper bag, he'd barely eaten, he realized, hadn't really noticed until this moment, another thing that had been sitting at the edge of his awareness without making it through. One more thing, Ragnarok said from the doorway. He turned, and there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. It wasn't warmth, goblins didn't do warmth in any conventional sense, but it was something adjacent to professional solidarity. Gringotts was defrauded, Potter. Your vaults, your trust vault, your family vault, there have been unauthorized withdrawals under the cover of binding magic. Funds redirected using the loyalty constructs and the behavioral bindings as legal cover, the bindings were used to create a paper trail that made the withdrawals appear to have your magical consent. Harry stared at him. Someone has been stealing from me. Multiple someones. For years. Ragnarok's expression was entirely flat. When I return to Gringotts today, I will file a formal complaint with the High Vault Authority. The investigation will be the most comprehensive financial audit Gringotts has conducted since 1862. Anyone who withdrew funds from your vaults under false magical consent will be held accountable under Goblin banking law. He paused. Goblin banking law is considerably less forgiving than British magical law. Good, Harry said. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. Students were crossing the grounds below the window, oblivious, heading to classes, arguing, laughing, carrying the perfectly ordinary weight of a Hogwarts morning. Harry watched them for a moment, the normal, frictionless world of people who did not have 31 soul bindings and did not know yet what their magic actually was. He thought about what Adelaide had said. A limb in a cast for 13 years. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in his tower with his half-moon glasses and his lemon drops and his careful grave smile, and the 5 bindings Ragnarok had identified with his signature, and the way he'd accepted Harry's name from the goblet with grief and speed and without fighting. He thought about Molly Weasley and her kitchen and her hugs and the loyalty construct key to her bloodline, and held both things simultaneously, the genuine warmth and the genuine violation, without letting either cancel the other out. He thought about Ron, Fred and George, Ginny. The Weasleys who had nothing to do with whatever Molly had done or been directed to do, who had just been themselves, just been his friends, and whether the friendship was real or manufactured, and the horrible truth that he couldn't be certain yet, not until the binding was off, not until he knew what was actually him and what was architecture. Fleur, he said. She was at the window now, standing beside him, close enough that he could speak quietly. Am I, he started, and stopped. Tried again. The loyalty construct keyed to the Weasley bloodline. Does it? He looked at her. Does it mean there are no loyalty constructs on how I feel about other people? New people? Fleur understood what he was actually asking. He could see her understand it, the slight widening and then settling of her expression. There was nothing in the scan keyed to Beauxbatons students, she said. Nothing keyed to any non-British magical bloodlines that we found. She held his gaze without looking away from it. Whatever you feel toward people you have met here, this year, that is yours. Harry nodded. Looked back at the lake. Okay, he said. Good. They stood there for a moment in the comfortable silence of 2 people who are still learning each other but have decided, independently and without much fanfare, to trust the process. The door opened and Cedric put his head in. Ragnarok says he needs a Hogwarts owl to send to Gringotts. Do we just go to the Ollery? Is that normal? Yes, Harry said. The Ollery is on the West Tower. He paused. Actually, I'll come. I need some air. Victor wants to come too. He says he needs to check in with Karkaroff, which I get the impression he wants to do as briefly as possible. Karkaroff can wait, Victor said from directly behind Cedric, making Cedric startle. They went out into the castle, the 4 of them, Harry, Fleur, Cedric, Victor, moving through the corridors with the easy collective purpose of people who have been through something together and come out the other side changed. Ragnarok walked at Harry's left, his satchel over his shoulder, his stride purposeful and short and very fast, attracting stares from every student they passed. Harry didn't pay the stares much attention. He'd been stared at his whole Hogwarts career. The stares didn't feel the same today, though. Not because they'd changed. Because he had 6 behavioral constraints off his cognition. His thoughts moving on their actual tracks rather than the diverted ones. His anger sitting in him like something useful rather than something dangerous, the kind of anger that had a direction and a plan instead of just heat. He thought, I need to talk to Sirius. Then he thought, I need to be careful about how I talk to Sirius, because Sirius is in hiding and any communication through official channels is monitored and Sirius's reaction to what Ragnarok found on the binding list is going to be significant. Then he thought, Dumbledore will know something has shifted in my signature by tonight. By tomorrow at the latest. He will start paying attention differently. Which means I have a limited window before he starts maneuvering. Then he thought, let him maneuver. I'm done being moved around the board. The Ollery smelled of feathers and cold air and the particular sharp smell of a lot of birds in a small stone tower. Ragnarok dictated a message to his contacts at Gringotts through Harry, who wrote it down. It was in gobbledygook, which Harry didn't speak, so he transcribed phonetically what Ragnarok said, and the goblin checked it with the focused attention of someone who understood that a misplaced consonant in financial goblin correspondence could have significant downstream consequences. The owl they sent was a large, indifferent gray that belonged to the Ollery Commons and launched itself from the window with the bored efficiency of a bird that carried important mail regularly and had formed no emotional attachments to the concept of urgency. Standing in the Ollery window, Harry looked out over Hogwarts. The towers, the grounds, the lake in the autumn light. A place he'd loved without reservation since he was 11. A place that had been, the scan last night had confirmed, partly programmed into him. He waited for that to hurt more than it did. The castle was still beautiful. The magic was still real. The things that had happened here, the friendships, the moments, the times he'd felt for the first time that he belonged somewhere, those had happened, regardless of the architecture of the loyalty binding. Real things had occurred inside constructed circumstances. He thought of something Adelaide had said during the night, in a quiet moment when Ragnar was examining one of the deeper bindings and Harry had asked her how anyone survived knowing this. "You are not required to retroactively unmake your life," she had said. "You are required only to move forward from a truer position." He'd thought about it for several hours. He thought about it again now. A truer position. "Potter," Ragnar said from behind him. Harry turned. "There is one thing I did not say in front of the others," Ragnar said. "About the vault audit." "Tell me." "The withdrawals," Ragnar said. "The largest single series of unauthorized withdrawals from your family vault were made in 1981, immediately following your parents' deaths. Before you were placed with the Muggles. A significant portion of the Potter estate was moved to accounts that Gringotts has since traced to a trust managed by," he stopped. "By Albus Dumbledore. On behalf of associated costs of the war effort." The Ollery was very quiet except for the birds. "He took my inheritance," Harry said. "A substantial portion of it. The family vault still holds considerable funds, the Potter wealth was not inconsiderable to begin with. But what was taken?" Ragnar opened his folio and showed Harry a number. Harry looked at the number. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want a complete accounting. Every canute. Everything that was moved, everything it was spent on, everyone who benefited." "You will have it," Ragnar said. "I give you my professional word, which under Goblin banking law constitutes a binding legal commitment." He paused. "And Potter, once the binding magic is removed and the coercion can be legally demonstrated, the standard under Goblin law is full restitution with interest. Plus penalties." "How significant are the penalties?" "Very," Ragnar said, with the first expression that might, on a goblin's face, have been satisfaction. Harry put the number from the folio away in the back of his mind where the other things were waiting, the anger, the plans, the list of 31 names. He looked out the Ollery window one more time. Below, far down on the grounds, he could see a figure in deep purple robes walking along the edge of the lake. Adelaide, taking air. Moving with the unhurried purpose of someone who had decided on a course of action and was now executing it step by methodical step. He thought, she's going to contact people. The ICW, she'd mentioned last night. The Goblin High Council. She's building the case from the outside while Ragnar builds it from the inside. He thought, and I need to build it from the middle. Ragnar, he said. The Triwizard Tournament. My entry. Can Gringotts investigate whether the binding magic on me was used to manipulate the goblet? Ragnar was already writing. Yes, he said. If the behavioral bindings were active during the selection process, and if a spelled entry with your hair or blood was used instead of a legitimate submission, the magical evidence would still be in the goblet's records. Goblets of fire retain magical impressions for the duration of their binding. He looked up. It may be possible to establish, legally, that your entry was a fraudulent submission made by a third party under the cover of coercive binding magic. Which would mean I was never legitimately entered, Harry said. Which would mean, Ragnar said, that any obligation the tournament magic creates is not binding on you. Harry felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. Can I still compete anyway? If I choose to. If the entry is established as fraudulent, competition becomes voluntary. Ragnar's pen moved. On your terms. Under your conditions. Harry looked at the sky over Hogwarts. Cold, clear, autumn blue. A sky that had been above him his whole life at Hogwarts, a sky he'd flown under 100 times, a sky that looked the same as always and meant something different now. "Let's go find the others," he said. "We have a lot of work to do." He walked out of the Ollery with Ragnarok at his side and the morning light coming in through the narrow stone windows, and somewhere below him the castle went about its ordinary business without knowing that the boy it had been constructed to contain had spent the night reading the blueprints of his own cage. And had started, quietly, efficiently, and without particular drama, to take it apart. Chapter 3, The Grandmother's War. Adelaide Delacour had started 3 wars in her lifetime. The first was in 1943, when she was 19 years old and had walked into the offices of the French Magical Resistance with evidence of a Vichy collaborator inside their own ranks and the particular expression of someone who had decided that being polite about treason was a luxury they could not afford. That war had lasted 6 months and ended with the collaborator in a French magical prison and Adelaide with a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered for the next 50 years. The second was in 1971, when a Beauxbatons potions professor had been systematically binding the magical cores of students from non-noble families and she had taken her evidence to the Board of Governors, been politely ignored, and then taken it to the ICW with a level of comprehensive documentation that left the Board of Governors no avenue of retreat. That war had lasted 3 weeks. The third was beginning this morning. She sat in the room Madame Maxime had quietly arranged for her use, a private study off the Beauxbatons carriage, warmed by a fire that smelled of French oak and a charm she'd renewed every morning for 40 years, and wrote letters with the speed and precision of someone who had been composing arguments in their head all night. The letters went to 6 people. Each one was different, calibrated to the recipient, carrying exactly the information they needed and nothing they didn't. She did not write in anger. Anger in correspondence was a tactical error, it allowed the recipient to focus on your emotion rather than your evidence. She wrote in the register of a healer-seer of 50 years professional standing presenting documented findings and requesting specific action. Calm. Meticulous. Irrefutable. The first letter went to Director Clotilde Vance at the International Confederation of Wizards, Magical Rights Division, Paris office. Adelaide had testified before Vance's division twice and found her to be a woman of genuine conviction and sufficient backbone to act on it. The second went to Healer Sovereign Mathilde Beaumont at the European Magical Medical Authority, the body responsible for investigating violations of the Chartier Protocols, the European equivalent of the ICW's Charter of Magical Rights, with the additional specificity of binding restrictions on magical healthcare. The third went to Grand Senior Goldseam at the Goblin High Council in Amsterdam, a colleague of Ragnarok's and a figure of significant political authority in international magical finance. The fourth went to someone who was not officially part of any authority, a retired British Auror named Amelia Bones, currently serving as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose reputation for following evidence wherever it led regardless of where that happened to point was well documented and who Adelaide had reason to believe was not entirely comfortable with certain features of Dumbledore's unchecked authority. The fifth was the most carefully written of all. It went to Remus Lupin, addressed to him through a channel that Fleur had provided after Harry had spent 20 minutes in the corridor outside the study going through careful mental exercises and deciding who he trusted independently of his bindings, and had settled on Lupin with the explanation, "He's never once made me feel like I owed him something. Every other adult in my life, Dumbledore, the Weasleys, even McGonagall, there's always been this undercurrent of debt or obligation. Remus just likes me. I think. And he's careful. He'll be careful with this." The sixth letter Adelaide held for a long moment before sealing. It was addressed to Sirius Black, care of a location that Harry had given her from memory with the absolute confidence of someone who had kept that address in a compartment of his mind reserved for things that mattered. She sealed it with a security charm that would destroy the letter if it was opened by anyone other than its recipient, and set it with the others. She sealed all 6 with her personal signet, the Healer-Seer seal of the Delacour line, recognized under French, British, and ICW law as a formal medical attestation, and attached Ragnarok's preliminary findings as documented evidence. Then she called the owl. It arrived within moments. It was a Beauxbatons owl, silver-gray, large and reliable, and it looked at the stack of letters with the professional equanimity of a bird that had carried worse. Quickly, she told it. It left. She sat back and looked at the fire for a moment, allowing herself 30 seconds of stillness before the next thing, and thought about Harry Potter's face last night when the ring count had reached 31. The steadiness of it. The way he'd asked questions instead of breaking down, built a framework instead of collapsing under the weight of what was being built for him. She had treated a great many people who had been harmed by people who claimed to love them. She knew the particular courage it took to look directly at that harm without finding excuses for it. Most people needed months before they could manage it. Harry had done it in a single night. She stood, smoothed her robes, and went to find her granddaughter. Fleur was in the fourth-floor room, sitting across from Harry at the cleared stone table, with a chessboard between them that someone had apparently conjured or borrowed, and they were playing with the focused antagonism of two people who are both genuinely good at chess and enjoying finding this out about each other. Victor sat nearby reading something in Bulgarian. Cedric was asleep on a conjured cot in the corner with the enviable efficiency of a person who can sleep anywhere. Ragnak was at the far end of the room doing something complicated with the unclassified bindings, running analyses, comparing notes, occasionally muttering in gobbledygook in a tone that suggested the findings were interesting in an unwelcome way. Rook to e4, Fleur said. I see it, Harry said. Then why haven't you responded to it? Because I'm thinking about whether responding to it is what you want me to do. Fleur's mouth did the thing where it almost curved into a smile, but she caught it. If you're thinking that far ahead, you should be losing. I'm not losing. You will be in 6 moves. 4 moves. Harry. She looked up from the board. That is not the correct response to that statement. I know. I meant I'll have you in 4 moves. She looked at the board. Looked back at him. Something shifted in her expression, genuine reassessment. She studied the board for a longer moment. She said. Adelaide looked at this scene with the practiced neutrality of a grandmother who had decided opinions about her granddaughter's life and was keeping every one of them to herself until asked. She cleared her throat. Harry. A moment. Harry looked up, immediately alert. He'd been like that all morning, quick to attend, quick to process. 6 behavioral bindings removed. It showed. The letters have been sent, she said. The ICW Rights Division, the EMMA, the Goblin High Council, Madame Bones at the MLE, and, she paused, Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. Harry went very still. Not the tense stillness of alarm, but the particular stillness of someone hearing something they've been hoping for. Remus will have his letter by this afternoon, she said. Sirius within the day. I used security seals, no one else can read them. What did you tell them? Harry asked. The truth, she said simply. The full findings. What was placed on you, when, and by whom? Ragnak's signature analysis. The vault audit findings. She sat down. I told them what you asked me to tell them, that you are handling this, that you are not in immediate danger, and that you need Remus to stay calm and Sirius to stay hidden until you say otherwise. Harry exhaled slowly. Sirius is going to be extremely difficult to keep stationary, Adelaide said. Yes. But the letter is sealed with a healer's formal instruction. Under both French and British law he is required to treat it as medical guidance. Whether Sirius Black has a healthy relationship with legally binding medical instructions is, I suspect, another matter. He doesn't, Harry confirmed. But Remus will manage him. I hope so. She looked at him carefully. How are you this morning? Truly. Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than the reflex dismissal she'd half expected. Strange, he said. Like the room is the same size but I'm seeing it differently. Some of what I thought was just, me, my personality, my instincts, I'm looking at it and wondering which parts were actual me and which parts were the bindings. He paused. Not in a destabilizing way. More like, cataloging. That is healthy, she said. The question of authentic self versus constructed behavior is one that will resolve naturally as the removal proceeds. The 6 bindings we removed yesterday were behavioral, they modified reactions and instincts. Your core personality, your values, your intelligence, your humor, she looked at the chessboard briefly, none of that was touched. What was touched was the filtering layer. The impulse modifier. The bindings couldn't change who you are. They could only redirect certain expressions of it. Harry looked at the board for a moment, then back at her. The shame construct, he said. The one you said needs 2 or 3 more days. Can we do it today instead? She studied him. It has deep roots. I know. You explained the risk. He held her gaze steadily. I've been carrying shame about being magical since before I could form clear memories. Every time the Dursleys punished me for something I didn't choose to do. Every time I sat in that cupboard and told myself there was something wrong with me. He paused. I'd like to stop carrying it sooner rather than later. Adelaide was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Ragnarok, who had been listening without pretending not to. The suppressor tendrils, she asked. I've mapped them overnight, Ragnarok said. He stood and came to the table, setting down an instrument, a small frame of dark wire strung with something that looked like very fine spider silk, which moved in response to something Harry couldn't detect. The root structure is deeper than ideal. But it is not unmanageable. The risk, specifically, is that if we remove the shame construct without controlling the response in the suppressor tendrils, we get an involuntary partial release of the first power suppressor before we're ready. How partial? Harry asked. 10 to 15%, Ragnarok said. It would not be the full release. But it would be uncontrolled and immediate, and you would feel it strongly. Would it be dangerous? To you? No. To your surroundings? He looked around the room, the stone table, the instruments, Cedric asleep in the corner. Potentially. Harry thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Can you clear the room? Harry, Fleur began. Not you, he said. I meant the instruments that could be damaged. Fleur closed her mouth. She looked at him with an expression that was partly exasperated and partly something else. If there is an involuntary partial release, Ragnarok said carefully, it will express itself through ambient magic. Sudden localized pressure. Objects may move or shatter. Nothing structural. Hogwarts is a castle, Harry said. It's been standing for 1,000 years. I think it can take 10%. Ragnarok looked at Adelaide. Move the instruments to the corridor, she said. It took 20 minutes to prepare. Ragnarok set up a containment frame, 4 posts of goblin-worked bronze arranged around Harry's chair, strung with the same fine wire from the portable instrument, creating a boundary that would, Ragnarok explained, channel any uncontrolled magical discharge upward rather than outward. Victor and Cedric carried most of the instruments to the corridor with careful hands. Fleur refused to leave the room and stationed herself against the far wall with her wand out and a look on her face that clearly communicated that anyone who told her to move would have a very bad afternoon. Harry sat in the chair. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about Petunia's voice saying freak and abnormal and nothing with the particular efficiency of someone who had been saying the same words for so long they'd stopped registering as cruelty and just became the weather. He thought about the first accidental magic he could clearly remember, blowing glass out of the boa constrictor's tank at the zoo, and the sick lurch of shame that had followed it, the desperate wish to undo it, to be normal, to not be whatever he was that made the Dursleys look at him like that. He thought about how he'd carried that feeling into Hogwarts. Into every classroom, every extraordinary thing he'd done. Under all of it, under the bravery and the recklessness and the stubborn refusal to stay down, under all of it, a hairline crack of shame that told him he didn't quite deserve any of it. He thought, that was never mine. Ready, he said. Adelaide placed her hands, very lightly, barely touching, on the sides of Harry's head, fingertips at his temples. Her touch was measured and warm. Ragnar positioned himself behind the chair with the spider silk instrument held level, watching its threads for movement. "Breathe," she said. Harry breathed. The removal of a binding, Harry was learning, didn't feel like something being taken away. It felt like something being returned. The first 6 had been a kind of lightning, a spaciousness. This one was different because its roots went deeper, because it had been there since before he could consciously remember anything, and when Adelaide's hands began the work and he felt the first thread of it release, it was like something cracking open in his chest. Not pain. Just, open. Like a window that had been painted shut for so long that the frame itself had warped, and now it was open, and the air coming through it was new. He heard a sound, low and resonant, and realized after a moment it was coming from the walls. Hogwarts itself, responding to the shift in the magic of one of its students. The stones humming, very quietly, like recognition. Then the tendril hit the first power suppressor. The discharge came upward through the containment frame exactly as Ragnarok had planned, a column of light that was pure, clean, startling green, not dark green, not killing curse green, but something older and more vital, the color of living things, the color of growing, and hit the ceiling and spread across it like water dropped on glass, and for a single extraordinary moment the entire ceiling of the room was covered in that light, the color of Harry Potter's eyes, the color of Lily Potter's eyes, spreading and settling and then gently fading. Every instrument in the corridor outside chimed simultaneously. Ragnarok lowered the wire frame. He was looking at the ceiling where the light had faded and his expression was doing something complicated. Adelaide stood back. Her face was professional and careful, but her eyes were different. The eyes of someone who has just seen something they will think about for years. Harry sat in the chair. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the wall opposite and felt the absence of the shame construct the way you feel the absence of a sound you'd stopped consciously hearing, not as silence exactly, but as a new kind of full. Victor had come back to the doorway. He stood there looking at the ceiling where the light had been with an expression stripped of all its usual reserve. Cedric had woken up. He was sitting on the cot looking at Harry with wide eyes. Fleur pushed off from the wall and crossed the room and sat on the edge of the table in front of Harry and looked at him directly. Her expression was entirely unmanaged. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yeah," Harry said. He sounded different to his own ears. Not older, not dramatically changed. Just, less muffled. As though something had been between him and his own voice for a long time and was now gone. "Yeah, actually. I really am." He stood up and the room felt different around him. Not physically different. Just, the dimensions of his own presence in it had changed slightly. He didn't know how to explain that and didn't try. "Ragnarok," he said. "The containment held," Ragnarok said, still looking at the ceiling. The suppressor tendrils responded exactly as predicted. "No damage." He paused. "The partial release is larger than I estimated." "Larger how?" "I said 10 to 15%. He looked at his instruments. The actual release was closer to 22. The room was quiet for a beat. Is that a problem?" Cedric asked. "It means," Ragnarok said slowly, "that the suppressor structure is more brittle than my initial analysis suggested. The tendrils were already under stress." He looked at Harry. "Your magic has been working against the suppressor consistently. For years. Every time you performed beyond what the suppressor intended to allow, you were forcing the structure. It has accumulated microfractures. Like a dam that's been leaking," Harry said. "A dam with significant structural fatigue," Ragnarok said. "When we do the formal suppressor removal, we need to do it carefully. Not because your magic is the danger. Because the suppressor structure itself may be more volatile than a clean removal usually produces. But it can be done." "Yes." Ragnarok said it with complete professional certainty. "It will take another week to fully map the fractures. Then we remove it in a controlled sequence rather than all at once. He paused. 2 weeks to full release, if we are careful. Harry nodded. 2 weeks. The first task was in 3 weeks. Then he thought, I have 22% more of my magic than I had yesterday morning. He raised his hand. Looked at the unlit candle on the stone table, the same one he hadn't been able to light wandlessly yesterday. He didn't think about it. He just did it. The candle lit. Not gently, not with the uncertain flicker of a first attempt. It lit cleanly and immediately, a strong steady flame, and Harry looked at it with an expression that was quietly, intensely satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with showing off and everything to do with the specific feeling of a thing that should have always been possible finally being possible. Wandless flame, Ragnarok said. At 14, Adelaide said. With only 22% of the suppressed capacity released, Ragnarok added. Cedric let out a breath that was mostly a laugh. Victor was looking at the candle with an expression that was significantly more serious. What's 22% of the suppressed portion going to look like when the whole thing comes off? Cedric asked. He looked between Adelaide and Ragnarok and then at Harry. I mean, actually. What are we talking about? We are talking, Adelaide said carefully, about the genuine, unfiltered magical capacity of Harry James Potter, which the bindings were specifically designed to contain because someone who examined it at close range decided it required containing. She looked at Harry. You are, in my professional assessment, a natural-born magical power of a category I have seen perhaps 4 times in 50 years of practice. And 3 of those times were in documented historical records, not in a room with a living patient. Harry looked at the candle. Right, he said. Then, because the alternative was to be overwhelmed by that and he didn't have time for it, what's the plan for today? They were still working through the answer to that question when the knock came at the door. It was a Hogwarts student knock, tentative but urgent, the knock of someone who'd been thinking about whether to knock for several minutes before doing it. Harry knew it immediately because he'd produced exactly that knock on various authority figure doors throughout his Hogwarts career. He crossed the room and opened the door. Hermione Granger stood in the corridor with a stack of books, a look of intense focused concern, and the particular expression she wore when she had spent a significant amount of time researching something and had arrived at conclusions that she was not entirely sure how to present. I heard, she said, and then stopped. She looked past Harry at the room, at Adelaide, Ragnarok, the instruments, the bronze containment posts still in their positions, the ceiling. Then back at Harry. Her eyes moved across his face with the quick analytical thoroughness of someone who had known him for 3 years and was registering that something had changed, not superficially but structurally, and was trying to categorize what. How much? Harry asked. Not details. The Ollery this morning, you were all together, and I saw the owl leave for Gringotts, and she stopped. Recalibrated. I've been researching soul binding since last night. Since last night, Harry said. The assessment was last night. I know. She held up the books slightly. Neville told me you'd gone off with Fleur's grandmother and a goblin and hadn't come back. I got worried. She paused. And then I started thinking about some things that have bothered me for years and I couldn't sleep. Harry stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. Hermione came in. She looked at Ragnarok with the transparent delight of someone encountering a professional in their area of interest and managing, barely, not to immediately ask 17 questions. She looked at Adelaide with recognition. You're Adelaide Delacour. You wrote the Chartier Protocol Supplementary Analysis in 1988. Adelaide's eyebrows rose slightly. I did. I've read it 3 times. Hermione looked almost embarrassed by her own enthusiasm, then set the books on the edge of the stone table and opened the top one to a marked page. I've been reading about binding signature analysis and I wanted to ask, if you've done a signature analysis and you know whose magic placed which bindings, does that constitute admissible evidence under ICW law? Because Article 42 of the ICW Charter says magical signature evidence is legally equivalent to physical evidence in, Miss Adelaide said. Granger. Hermione Granger. Miss Granger, Adelaide said, with the measured consideration she gave to anyone who cited her own published work back at her accurately, yes. Ragnar's signature analysis is fully admissible under Article 42. I have already submitted it, along with my diagnostic findings, to the ICW Rights Division this morning. Hermione exhaled. Good. Because I also found this, she opened the second book, another marked page, the Wiesengemot Remediation Act of 1962, which says that in cases of coercive magical interference with a minor, the minor retains the right to seek full legal remedy up to and including criminal prosecution regardless of the standing of the accused. There's no statute of limitations on magical rights violations. None. The room was quiet for a moment. She is useful, Victor said, from the corner. Very, Fleur agreed. Hermione looked at Harry with the expression she'd had in their first year when she'd realized the broomstick trap might actually kill him, the expression of someone whose analytical mind has fully engaged with the stakes and is now completely committed regardless of the personal risk. Harry, she said. Tell me what they found. All of it. I want to help. Harry looked at her, this girl who had been his friend for 3 years, who had spent her own night in a library researching ways to help him before he'd told her there was anything to help with, who was standing in this room with 6 books and a cited legal statute and the expression of someone who has made an entirely clear-eyed choice about which side they're standing on. He thought about the loyalty construct key to the Weasley bloodline. He thought about what Ragnar had said about new people met this year being unbound. And he thought, Hermione has been mine from day one. No binding required. Sit down, he said. It's a long list. She sat. He told her. He told her all 31. The behavioral bindings, the power suppressors, the loyalty constructs. The vault theft. The Horcrux in his scar. The signature analysis. The signatures. He said Dumbledore's name and watched her face go through 3 distinct phases of reaction, disbelief, forced reassessment, and then the cold analytical anger of someone who has restructured their understanding of a situation and arrived at clear conclusions about it. He said Molly Weasley's name and watched something more complicated move through her. He said Peter Pettigrew's name and watched her jaw set. He did not soften any of it. He had decided, somewhere in the night, that the people he trusted deserved the unfiltered version. Managing information to protect people's feelings about him was a habit of someone who expected to be abandoned and was preemptively controlling the terms of it. He wasn't doing that anymore. When he finished, Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, the monitoring binding that Snape has on you. The one that alerts when your emotional state or magical output spikes. Yes. He would have received a signal last night, she said. During the assessment. And this morning. Ragnar shielded the removals, Harry said. He'll have gotten a minor fluctuation signature, not the full picture. But he's paying attention to you now. More than usual. Probably. Hermione looked at the table. Then at Ragnar. Can the monitoring binding be removed without Snape knowing it's been removed? So it still sends signals, but false ones. Ones we choose. Ragnar stopped writing. He looked at Hermione with the expression of a craftsman who has been presented with an interesting technical problem. Theoretically, he said. A redirect working placed over the monitoring binding would intercept the genuine signal and replace it with a chosen output. So he thinks nothing has changed, Hermione said. Until we are ready for him to know otherwise, Ragnar said. Can you do that? Yes, Ragnar said. He began a new section of notes. I begin to see why you keep her, he said to Harry. She keeps herself, Harry said. Hermione looked between them. I'm sitting right here. We know, Harry said. The afternoon moved. Adelaide worked with Ragnar on the detailed mapping of the remaining bindings, the two of them building a removal schedule with the systematic precision of engineers planning a controlled demolition. Sequence mattered, structural considerations mattered, the order in which things came down would determine how much of the surrounding architecture stayed intact. Harry worked with Hermione on the legal framework, because if there was going to be a confrontation with Dumbledore it needed to be airtight, and because Hermione's brain in legal research mode was essentially a very precise and very fast-moving piece of machinery that Harry had learned to point at problems rather than try to replicate. Fleur translated 3 of Adelaide's French medical documents into English for Hermione's reference. Victor, without being asked, produced from his personal luggage a text on Eastern European soul-binding law that had a section on precedent cases from the 1800s that turned out to be directly relevant to the question of removing a Horcrux without harm to the host. Cedric went and got lunch for everyone, because someone had to, and came back with a loaded tray and the information that Dumbledore had been seen heading toward the Ollery himself approximately an hour ago, which meant he'd possibly received a communication and was possibly responding to it, and they should probably factor that into their timeline. "He's fishing," Harry said, when Cedric reported this. "He's felt the fluctuation in my signature through Snape's monitor and he's trying to find out what it means before he talks to me." "How do you want to handle it?" Cedric asked. Harry thought about it. "Normally," he said. "I go to dinner tonight, I go to classes tomorrow, I behave exactly the way I always have. The monitoring binding is sending him false signals. He has nothing concrete. I want him operating on suspicion, not certainty, until I'm ready." "And when will you be ready?" Hermione asked. Harry looked at Ragnar, who looked at the removal schedule on the table. "The power suppressor," Ragnar said, "can be removed in full in 10 days if the mapping proceeds at the current rate. We also have the second-tier behavioral bindings and the loyalty constructs to clear before then." He looked at the schedule. "I propose we prioritize the suppressor and the loyalty constructs. The behavioral bindings can follow. The 2 unclassified bindings and the Horcrux are last, the unclassified ones because we still don't fully understand them, the Horcrux because it requires separate specialized preparation. So in 10 days, Harry said, I have my actual magic back." "Yes. And the loyalty constructs off before that." "Within the week, if you wish." Harry nodded. "Then I talk to Dumbledore the day after the suppressor comes off," he said. "Not before. I want to be standing in my own power when I have that conversation. I'm not walking into it with 60% of myself locked behind his binding." There was a beat of quiet around the table. "He's not going to expect that," Hermione said slowly. "He's going to expect Harry Potter to be manageable," Adelaide said, from the corner. She said it very quietly, but the word landed in the room with weight. "He's going to expect exactly what I've always been," Harry agreed. "Reactive. Emotional. Running on instinct, fighting from the back foot, grateful for whatever scrap of information he decides I'm old enough to handle." He paused. "I'm not that anymore. And he doesn't know that yet." The afternoon light came through the windows long and gold, and the fire in the hearth burned steadily, and Harry Potter sat at the stone table in the 4th-floor classroom with his people around him and looked at the removal schedule and felt, very clearly, the shape of the next 10 days. He thought about the first task. 3 weeks away. Ragnar had said the goblet's magical records might show evidence of fraudulent entry, which meant the entry might be legally invalid, which meant competing was his choice. He thought about choosing to compete not because he had to, not because he was trapped, but because he was Harry Potter and he had never once in his life backed away from a challenge that was worth taking on, and this one he would meet on his own terms, with his own power, in front of the entire magical world. He thought about what 22% felt like and what 100 would be. He thought about the names on the chains, Dumbledore, Pettigrew, Snape, Molly Weasley, his Aunt Petunia as a vehicle, Voldemort's fragment lodged in his scar. He thought about who each of them had been to him and what each of them had done and filed it in the part of himself that was cataloging rather than reacting, because the reacting would come and was legitimate and he would let it come when it came, but not today. Not in the middle of planning. The door opened. McGonagall stood in the doorway. She looked at the room, at Adelaide, at Ragnock, at Harry, at Hermione and Cedric and Victor, at the bronze containment posts still in their positions and the stone table covered in instruments and notes. She was perfectly still for a moment. Then her eyes went to Harry's face and she did what Hermione had done and Fleur had done and everyone who knew Harry did when they looked at him today, she registered the difference without immediately being able to name it. "Mr. Potter," she said. Her voice was precise and careful. "Headmaster Dumbledore would like to see you." "At your convenience," he said. Harry met her eyes. "I'm busy just now," he said. "Would tomorrow morning work?" McGonagall absorbed this. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way a woman who had taught at Hogwarts for 40 years and recognized the difference between a student avoiding the headmaster and a student who had made a strategic decision looked at the specific expression on Harry's face. "I'll let him know," she said. She started to close the door. Then stopped. Looked at Harry one more time. "Are you all right?" she asked, and the question had layers in it, the kind of layers that came from 40 years of caring about students combined with a complicated relationship with the truth about what caring about students sometimes required ignoring. "Better than I've been in a long time," Harry said. "Thank you for asking." She studied him for another beat. Something crossed her face that was too quick to read. Then she left. Harry looked at Fleur, who was looking at the closed door with an expression that said she'd read several things in that interaction and was filing them away. "She knows something is off," Hermione said. "She knows something has changed," Harry said. "There's a difference." He looked back at the removal schedule on the table. 10 days, he said. "We keep our heads down, we do the work, and in 10 days we have a very different conversation with the headmaster than the one he's preparing for." He looked around the table. Hermione with her books. Cedric with a half-eaten sandwich. Victor watching with those dark, considering eyes. Fleur with her chin up and her expression saying she was entirely prepared for whatever came next. Adelaide and Ragnock, the two people who had started this, who had seen something wrong and had chosen to look directly at it and do something about it. "Thank you," Harry said. To all of them. Not elaborately. Just directly. "All of you. For being here." "Obviously," Cedric said. Fleur looked at the chessboard, still sitting to one side where they'd left it that morning. "You never finished your move," she said. "Knight to f6, Harry said, without looking at it. Fleur looked at the board. Her eyes moved across it. "A beat. 2. Murd," she said. Harry smiled. It was a genuine smile, the unguarded kind, and it reached his eyes and stayed there. Ragnock watched it happen and then went back to his schedule, but the scratch of his pen on the paper was, perhaps, slightly less grim. Outside, the day moved toward evening. Somewhere in the castle, Dumbledore sat in his tower with his half-moon glasses and his lemon drops and the memory of a fluctuation in a monitoring signal that he couldn't fully account for, and he thought about Harry Potter, and he prepared for a conversation he believed he was entirely in control of. He was not in control of it. He didn't know that yet. Chapter 4, Fire Without a Cage. 10 days passed the way significant days do, not slowly, not quickly, but with the particular density of time that is being used properly. Harry went to classes. He sat in potions and watched Snape watch him with that familiar calculating narrowness and gave the man absolutely nothing to work with, performing at his usual level, no more, no less, because the redirect working Ragnock had placed over the monitoring binding was feeding Snape a carefully curated signal of normalcy, and Harry had decided that looking at Snape every day knowing what he knew was useful practice for the conversation coming with Dumbledore. He sat in transfiguration and caught McGonagall looking at him 3 separate times with the expression she'd had in the doorway that first evening. He didn't address it. He did, however, perform a particularly clean switching spell that made her go still for a half-second before writing something in her notes, and he found a quiet satisfaction in that. He ate meals in the Great Hall. He talked to Ron and Ginny and Fred and George with the particular attentiveness of someone who is listening for what is real underneath what might be constructed, and what he found was complicated and human and not reducible to a simple answer. Ron was Ron, loyal, occasionally thoughtless, generous in the ways that mattered and oblivious in the ways that drove Harry slightly mad. The loyalty construct key to the Weasley bloodline was still present, still active, still coloring the edges of his feelings, but in the 10 days of working toward its removal, he developed a clearer sense of what was him and what was the binding, and what he found was that he genuinely liked Ron, genuinely valued the friendship, regardless of the architectural interference. The binding had enhanced something real. That was different from manufacturing something from nothing. It didn't excuse what had been done. But it changed the shape of his anger about it. Molly Weasley's binding was scheduled for removal on day 7. Harry asked Ragnarok to pull it gently, carefully, watching for evidence of how it had been placed and under what conditions, because he still wanted to know whether she'd been directed or willing. Ragnarok worked for 3 hours on it and came away with a clear answer. She was asked, Ragnarok said. There is no coercive signature in the casting structure. She placed it willingly. He paused. However, the person who asked her almost certainly did not describe it as a loyalty construct. The language used in such requests is typically protective. Make sure he stays close to the family. Make sure he feels safe with us. Something of that nature. So she was deceived about what she was actually doing, Harry said. Likely, Ragnarok said. Whether that mitigates the harm, it changes what she is, Harry said carefully. It doesn't change what was done to me. He breathed. Remove it. The Weasley binding came off on day 7. With it went a warmth that Harry had always associated specifically with the burrow, with Molly's kitchen, with the sound of the Weasley household at full volume, and what remained underneath, without the artificial enhancement, was something quieter and more honest. Still real. Still there. Just his own, unaugmented, the natural affection of a boy who had found the first thing resembling a functional family in his life and had genuinely loved it. That was enough. It was actually enough. The other loyalty constructs, the one keyed to Hogwarts as an institution, and the 2 remaining behavioral bindings, came off in the 3 days that followed. Each removal produced a different quality of change. The Hogwarts binding lifting felt like stepping back from a painting to see it more clearly. The castle was still beautiful, still his home in the truest sense, but he could now see its failures without the binding smoothing over them, could think critically about its systems without the faint nausea that had always accompanied that kind of thinking before. The behavioral bindings, removed last before the main event, were the strangest. One had been suppressing his instinct to seek alliances outside Hogwarts, gone now, which explained why reaching toward Victor and Cedric and Adelaide had felt more natural than his previous experience of trusting new people. The other had been dampening his capacity for strategic long-term thinking, nudging him toward reactive decisions rather than planned ones, keeping him perpetually in the present tense of crisis response rather than the future tense of actual planning. That one was elegant, Ragnarok said, when it came off. Whoever designed it understood that strategic thinking is the most dangerous capability in a powerful wizard. Reactive power you can predict and counter. Strategic power you cannot. Dumbledore's? Harry asked. Dumbledore's, Ragnarok confirmed. Harry sat with that for a while. Then he went back to work. Because on day 10, the power suppressor was scheduled to come down. The preparation for it was the most extensive of anything Ragnarok had done. He spent 4 days mapping the fracture structure in careful detail, working with instruments Harry had never seen before, brought from Gringotts on the large indifferent grey owl, packed in cases that Ragnarok handled with the care of a surgeon with a scalpel. He built a removal sequence, 14 distinct steps, each one dismantling a different structural component of the suppressor, each one carefully ordered to prevent the released pressure from becoming uncontrolled. The location was changed from the 4th floor classroom. Ragnarok had assessed the room and found it insufficient for what they expected, and had requested, through Adelaide, through Madame Maxime, through a conversation with the castle itself that was conducted in goblin ritual language that Harry found fascinating and filed for later, the use of a different space. The room of requirement had given them exactly what they needed. Harry wasn't entirely surprised by this. He'd found the room in his third year by accident and had always had the impression it was paying a particular kind of attention. The room it provided was large, stone-floored, high-ceilinged, with no furnishings except the chair at its center and the circle Ragnarok drew around it in a compound of crushed obsidian and silver that took him most of day 9 to prepare. The circle had 13 points marked in goblin script, each one corresponding to a step in the removal sequence. At each point stood a small bronze post, different from the containment posts. These were absorption posts, designed not to channel the discharge but to receive and ground it. Think of them as lightning rods, Ragnarok said. When the suppressor structure fractures, the released energy will move through the circle and into the posts. The posts will conduct it into the castle's foundational wards, which are old enough and large enough to absorb it without difficulty. What does it feel like? Harry asked. When it comes off. Ragnarok looked at him. I have removed power suppressors from 11 people in my career, he said. Every one of them described it differently. The commonalities are intensity, disorientation, and a period of adjustment that varies by individual. One described it as resurfacing from deep water. One described it as waking from a dream. He paused. One simply laughed for approximately 4 minutes and then went home. Harry looked at the circle. And after the adjustment period? You will have access to your full magical capacity, Ragnarok said. Which, based on the partial release and subsequent measurements, I have now calculated with a degree of confidence. He looked at his notes. You are familiar with the standard scale the ICW uses to classify magical power levels? No. Standard scale runs from 1 to 10. 10 is the upper bound of documented human magical ability. Historical figures at 10 or above include Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, Dumbledore at his peak in the 1940s, and Voldemort before his destruction in 1981. He looked at Harry over the notes. Your partial release registered at 4.7. That is 22% of the suppressed capacity, plus the 30% that was always accessible. Harry did the arithmetic. So total, my calculation puts your natural level at somewhere between 8 and 9, Ragnarok said. Possibly above 9. The fracture pattern in the suppressor suggests the structure was built to contain considerably more than 8. He closed the notes. We won't know the exact number until it's off. Harry absorbed this. He thought about Dumbledore, who had sat at 10 in his prime, who was currently perhaps at 8 given his age, and about what it meant that someone of that caliber had looked at an infant and decided specific containment was necessary. He thought, he was afraid of me before I was old enough to be afraid of anything. Day 10 tomorrow, Harry said. Day 10 tomorrow, Ragnarok confirmed. Adelaide appeared in the doorway of the room of requirement. Harry, she said. You have a visitor. The visitor was Remus Lupin. He was standing in the corridor outside the room, wearing traveling robes that were slightly damp from rain, with the expression of a man who had spent 10 days sitting with information that was changing the shape of everything he thought he knew and had finally arrived at the point where sitting still was no longer possible. He looked tired in the deep way that Remus always looked tired, not just physically but in the way of someone carrying weight that had been accumulating for a long time. When he saw Harry, something crossed his face that was grief and relief and something Harry didn't have an immediate word for. Something that lived in the neighborhood of guilt but was more specific than that. Remus, Harry said. Harry. His voice was steady, but just. I got the letter. I know. Remus looked at him, the full, careful look of a man who had known Harry since his birth in some sense, who had been his father's best friend, who had failed him in the specific way that good people failed people they loved by prioritizing the comfort of other adults over the truth owed to a child. He looked at Harry's face and saw the same thing everyone saw and didn't know how to categorize. How are you? Remus asked. Better, Harry said. Getting better. Come in. He brought Remus into the room, which had already adjusted slightly to accommodate another person. A second chair appeared near the wall, and the fire in the grate burned a little warmer. Remus looked at the circle on the floor, at the bronze posts, at the 13 goblin script points, and his face went through a quiet technical comprehension. The suppressor removal, he said. Tomorrow. Remus nodded. He sat in the chair near the wall and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Harry, who had sat on the floor cross-legged in the way he sat when he was thinking and didn't need the formality of furniture. I need to tell you something, Remus said. Before tomorrow. Before you go into that circle, you should know, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what, I didn't have the vocabulary for what I was feeling, but since your first year, there have been things. Your magical development, the specific pattern of it. The way you do something extraordinary and then have stretches that seemed inconsistent with what you just demonstrated. He paused. I told myself it was stress. Inconsistent training. The trauma of your early life affecting your magical expression. He looked at Harry directly. I should have looked harder. I should have, Remus, Harry said. Let me finish. You didn't put the bindings there, Harry said. You didn't know about the bindings. You noticed something was wrong and made the wrong call about what it was. He paused. That's being human. That's not the same as what was done to me. Remus was quiet for a moment. You're being generous. I'm being accurate, Harry said. There's a list of names, Remus. A real one. Yours isn't on it. Something in Remus's face shifted, slightly, with the particular quality of a long-carried tension releasing. Serious, Harry said. How is he? Remus closed his eyes briefly. He has destroyed 4 chairs in the last week, he said. He is, technically, stationary. He is absolutely not calm. He opened his eyes. He wants to come. I know. He understands he can't. Intellectually. The emotional understanding is taking longer. Remus looked at Harry with a slight helpless expression that was deeply familiar. It was the expression of someone who loved Sirius Black and was managing the consequences of that on a full-time basis. He says to tell you, he stopped. Tell me. He says to tell you that he is going to make this right. Specifically, he said, tell Harry that every single person on that list is going to answer for what they did, and if the legal system doesn't manage it, I will personally. Remus stopped again. The rest of it is not suitable for me to repeat. Harry felt something warm and complicated in his chest. Tell him I said, stay put, stay hidden, let the goblins and the ICW do their jobs, because what they're building is going to be significantly more effective than whatever he was going to do with his wand, and I need him free and alive and present for the part where things actually get fixed. Remus looked at him for a long moment. You sound different, he said. I am different, Harry said simply. Not, I'm still me. Just more of me. Yes. Remus tilted his head slightly. You sound like James did when he was about 19. After he grew up. He paused. James at 19 was genuinely alarming. Good alarming or bad alarming? To his enemies, unambiguously bad alarming, Remus said. To the rest of us, extraordinary. Harry held that for a moment. Then he nodded. Stay for tomorrow, he said. I'd like you to be there. Wild horses, Remus said quietly. Morning arrived with the particular quality of mornings before significant things, clear, slightly too still, carrying the sense that the air itself knows something is about to change. The room of requirement held 7 people at the edges of the circle, Adelaide, Ragnarok, Fleur, Hermione, Cedric, Victor, and Remus. They stood at equal intervals around the perimeter, not because Ragnarok had instructed them to, he hadn't, but because it felt right, the natural geometry of people who had gathered because they chose to, arranged around the center point like compass bearings. Harry stood in the circle, in the chair at its center, and looked at the 13 goblin script points on the floor. Ragnar came to stand before him. He looked at Harry with the full weight of 300 years of professional experience and something that was not quite paternal but was in the same family of feeling. The sequence will take approximately 40 minutes, Ragnar said. At each of the 13 points, you will feel a release. Some will be minor. The last 3 will be significant. He held Harry's gaze. Do not fight it. Whatever you feel coming through, let it through. Resistance creates feedback, and feedback at this scale can be damaging. Your magic knows how to be what it is. You simply need to stop holding it in the shape it was forced into. Let it through, Harry said. Let it through. Harry nodded. Settled into the chair. He looked at the people around the circle's edge, Hermione with her hands clasped in front of her, focused and still, Cedric with his arms loose at his sides and his expression open, Victor standing like someone prepared for a physical ordeal, which was its own form of solidarity, Fleur with her chin up and her eyes on him, entirely steady, Remus with one hand against the wall, one hand in his pocket, watching Harry with the kind of careful attention that was also a kind of prayer, Adelaide. With her seer's pendant glowing slightly at her collarbone, her expression the professional calm of someone who has presided over 50 years of difficult and necessary things. All right, Harry said. Let's start. The first 8 steps of the removal sequence were manageable. Each one felt like a bolt being withdrawn from a door, mechanical, deliberate. At each goblin script point on the floor, Ragnar made a gesture with an instrument Harry had no name for, a thin wand of black stone etched with the finest script he'd ever seen, and at each gesture Harry felt something in the structure of the binding shift, give, release. A click, almost. Not physically but in the same way that a mathematical equation feels when the last term resolves. The bronze posts at each point began to glow faintly at the 3rd step. By the 8th they were warm enough to see in the morning light. Then Ragnar reached the 9th step. Harry felt the 9th release the way you feel the first crack in ice underfoot, not pain, but the unmistakable knowledge that the structure has been compromised and the center will not hold. The air in the room changed. Something pressured in it, building, the way the atmosphere feels before lightning. Hermione's hair moved in an absent wind. The candles in the room's high sconces flared and then steadied. 10th, Ragnar said, and moved to the next point. The 10th release was larger. Harry's hands gripped the arms of the chair not because he was afraid but because the sheer physical force of what was moving through him required anchoring, something to push against, a fixed point. The bronze posts went from warm to bright, orange gold, the color of banked coals catching a draft. 11th. Harry had been told what the last 3 would feel like and he had thought he understood what that meant and he had been, he realized now, completely wrong about the scale of it. The 11th step of the removal sequence took the structural heart of the suppressor, the oldest component, the foundational piece that Ragnar had identified as Dumbledore's work, the one that had been in place since Harry was barely a year old, and it began to fracture. Not all at once. In sequence, as designed. But even in sequence, even controlled, even moving through the absorption posts exactly as planned, the energy that came through that fracture was not a trickle and not a flood. It was a tide. Harry felt it from somewhere that was not precisely his body and not precisely his magic but the place where both of them met and were the same thing, the place that was most essentially him, he felt it come home. 13 years of locked-away self, returning in a sequence of releases that were each individually overwhelming and collectively staggering, and he did what Ragnar had told him to do. He let it through. The room of requirement was designed by Hogwarts for the purpose of whatever its user needed most. What Harry needed most, in this moment, was a room that could hold what was happening to him without the walls coming down. The room held. The discharge went upward through the circle, into the posts, out through the castle's foundational wards, and the castle, 1,000 years old, built by 4 of the most powerful magical architects Britain had ever produced, absorbed it with the deep equanimity of ancient stone meeting fire it was built to contain. The lights in the room went white. Every window in Hogwarts, as would be reported afterward by students who happened to be looking in the right direction, flared simultaneously with a single pulse of green-white light that came from the 7th floor and was gone before anyone could properly register it. In the room of requirement, Harry Potter sat in a chair at the center of the circle with his eyes open and his hands loose and his breathing measured, and the last of the 13-year suppressor came apart around him, and his magic, his actual magic, the whole unfiltered totality of it, came into the world for the first time since he was an infant. The 12th step. The 13th. Ragnarok stepped back from the final point. He lowered the black stone instrument. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at his hands. The room was entirely still. Nobody spoke. The bronze posts were cooling now, their glow fading from orange to red to warm gold to the neutral sheen of spent work. Harry stood up. He stood up and the room felt different around him, not because it had changed but because the measure of himself within it had changed, and the difference between the two things was significant. He felt, full, was the only word that came close. Complete. Like a piece of music being played at the correct tempo for the first time after years of hearing it slowed. He looked at Ragnarok. Scale, he asked. His voice was steady. Ragnarok was looking at an instrument that Harry hadn't noticed him holding, small, flat, a disc of polished obsidian with a needle of the same black crystal as the portable compass. The needle was against the upper stop of its range. The scale, Ragnarok said, goes to 10. He showed Harry the disc. The needle is at the stop. Which means the instrument's upper range is insufficient, Ragnarok said. He looked at Harry with the expression of a professional who had spent 300 years being difficult to surprise. I will need to recalibrate. In the silence that followed this, Remus made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't quite either. He sat down against the wall without particularly intending to and pressed the heel of his hand to his mouth and looked at Harry with wet eyes that he made absolutely no effort to hide. Your father, he said, would have been unbearable about this. In the best possible way. Harry looked at him. The fullness of what was moving through him, the magic newly settled, the grief of it, the rightness of it, threatened to become too large for words and he let it be large for a moment without trying to contain it. Then he turned to the rest of the room. Hermione was crying with complete composure, the way Hermione cried, letting it happen without letting it interfere with her thinking, tears on her face and her expression simultaneously overwhelmed and fiercely, precisely glad. Cedric was grinning. It was the wide uncomplicated grin of someone who had no complicated feelings about this at all and was simply happy, and it was one of the most genuinely welcome things Harry had seen in a long time. Victor was nodding slowly. He looked at Harry and then at the bronze posts and then back at Harry, and said, the first task will be interesting. It will, Harry agreed. Fleur had crossed the circle's edge, not running, just walking, straight and direct, and she stopped in front of him and looked up at his face with an expression that had several things in it and she didn't manage any of them, just let them all be visible, relief, fierce satisfaction, something gentler that she wasn't yet putting a name to. Bien, she said quietly. Yeah, Harry said. They stood there for a moment, close enough that he could feel the warmth off her and the slight shift of air when she breathed. Adelaide watched this from across the room and wrote nothing in her private journal but looked as though she was thinking several things with great precision. The first task came 6 days later. The dragons had been the worst-kept secret at Hogwarts, which Harry knew because Hermione had found out before the official announcement through a combination of overhearing conversations and the ruthless information-gathering capability she applied to anything she considered important. She'd told Harry, who had already known because Victor had mentioned it in the matter-of-fact way of someone who had already processed the information and moved on to preparation. What Harry had done with the information, however, was different from what any of them expected. He'd gone to Ragnarok. Dragons, he'd said. Ragnarok had said, the suppressor is fully removed. The loyalty constructs are gone. The behavioral bindings are gone. What you are considering doing? I want to approach it without a pre-planned solution, Harry said. I want to see what I can actually do. Without training wheels. Without a specific spell I've been told is the right answer. He paused. Is that strategically sound or is it reckless? Ragnarok had thought about it for a long time. Then, it is both, he said. Strategically it is sound if your instincts are as capable as your power, which I believe they are. Tactically it carries risk because uncharted application of newly released ability can be unpredictable. He looked at Harry. What does your instinct tell you? That I'll know what to do when I'm in front of it, Harry said. Then you will know what to do when you're in front of it. That had been the preparation. The morning of the first task was sharp and cold, the kind of November morning that made the grounds of Hogwarts look like a woodcut, all high contrast and clean edges. Harry walked to the champion's tent with his hands in his pockets and his mind running very quietly, which was new and pleasant. The strategic thinking suppressor had been off for 6 days and his mind had spent those 6 days doing something he'd never experienced before, planning without anxiety, assessing without the reflexive catastrophizing, thinking several moves ahead with a calm deliberateness that felt like using a muscle for the first time and discovering it had apparently been doing push-ups in the background this whole time. The tent smelled of canvas and cold air. The 3 other champions were already there, Cedric looking composed and alert, Victor with his arms crossed and his game face on, Fleur standing near the tent wall with her wand held loosely at her side. They looked at Harry when he came in. Ready? Cedric asked. Yes, Harry said. Not performatively. Just accurately. Fleur looked at him with the specific assessment she'd been applying to him since the room of requirement, the look that was recalibrating on an ongoing basis. You know it's a dragon, she said. I know it's a dragon, he said. You have no plan. I have a disposition, he said. It's not the same as no plan. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at him for another moment. Don't be reckless, she said. I won't be reckless. Being OP is not the same as being invincible. I know the difference. She held his gaze for one more moment, then looked away with the precise controlled expression of someone who has decided to trust someone else's judgment and is finding the experience bracing. The bag came around. Harry drew the Hungarian horntail, the hardest, the fastest, the one with the longest tail spike range, the one that the dragon handlers had apparently had more trouble with than any of the others. Cedric looked at the miniature dragon Harry was holding with the expression of someone maintaining composure through genuine effort. Right, Cedric said. It'll be fine, Harry said. Cedric looked at him. You've got a full tank now, he said quietly. Go show them. Cedric went first. Managed his Welsh green with impressive skill, a clever transfiguration that distracted the dragon long enough to get the egg. The crowd roared. Fleur went second. Her Vela magic made her common Welsh green lethargic and docile enough to walk past, elegant and effective, which was distinctly Fleur. More roaring. Victor went third, a conjunctivitis curse that gave his Chinese fireball temporarily impaired vision and let him retrieve the egg before it could reorient. Disciplined, precise, no wasted movement. Then Harry. He walked into the arena and the noise of the crowd broke over him like a wave and he let it wash past and looked at the Hungarian horntail. It was magnificent in the way that genuinely dangerous things are magnificent, 40 feet of armored muscle and controlled fury, chained at the neck but fully operational in every other sense, and it fixed its eyes on Harry the moment he came into its sight line and made a sound that was less a roar than a statement of intent. Harry stood still. He looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at him. Around them the crowd was doing what crowds do, noise, movement, anticipation. Harry wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was paying attention to the dragon. He'd grown up in a household where rage was the primary available weather, where fury was the atmosphere you navigated every day. He knew what controlled aggression looked like from the perspective of the smaller party in a room with it. He knew that the worst thing you could do with a genuinely powerful aggressive entity was attempt to fight it on its own terms. You didn't fight something that large by being louder than it. You found the pivot point, the thing it cared about more than hurting you. The nest. The eggs, the real ones, not the golden prize egg. The horntail was here because someone had brought it here, and it was angry because it was chained and surrounded by noise and separated from whatever environment constituted home, and in the middle of all that noise and chain and separation it had its eggs, and the eggs were the thing it would not abandon. Harry looked at the nest. Looked at the golden egg inside it. He considered simply walking forward. Not charging. Not running. Not performing anything for the crowd. Walking forward, calmly, with his wand at his side, directly toward the nest, maintaining eye contact with the horntail. He did it. The arena went very quiet. The horntail lowered its head. Its chain clinked. It opened its mouth and a gout of fire came out, not aimed yet, just a warning, a statement of position, come no further. Harry stopped. Let the fire die. Maintained eye contact. Then he raised his wand and cast a warming charm, not at the dragon, not at himself. At the nest. At the real eggs. The horntail's attention, entirely fixed on Harry, flickered to the nest. A very small flicker. Barely visible. But there. Harry said, in Parseltongue, and had not known until the words were coming out of him that he was going to say them in Parseltongue, had not planned it, but some instinct that was now fully operational had understood something about this moment. Your eggs are safe. I am not here for your eggs. Only the golden one. Only the one that is not yours. The entire crowd heard the hissing. The ripple that went through the stands was audible even to Harry, standing in the arena floor. The horntail heard it differently. Its head tilted. Harry walked forward, slowly, maintaining eye contact. He kept talking. The golden one. Only the golden one. Your eggs are warm. I warmed them. I mean no harm to yours. The horntail watched him come. It had drawn back slightly, not retreat, but reassessment. Its chain was slack. Its fire was contained. It was doing something that 40 feet of apex predator rarely does in an arena full of noise and humans. It was listening. Harry reached the nest. He reached down, without looking away from the horntail's eyes, and picked up the golden egg. The horntail made a sound. Low, deep, the structural resonance of it going through the ground and up through Harry's feet. It was not a roar. It was something else. He didn't have a word for it in human language. He stepped back. 3 steps, 4, 5, maintaining the eye contact until he was far enough that he could look away without it reading as aggression. He looked away. He walked to the edge of the arena. The crowd was entirely silent for 2 full seconds. Then it came down like a physical thing, the noise of 3 stands of people who had just watched something none of them had a framework for, and didn't know whether to be astonished or frightened or both. In the champion's tent, Cedric stood with his mouth open. Victor was very still. Fleur had both hands pressed against her mouth, which was as unguarded as Harry had ever seen her. At the judges' table, Dumbledore was watching Harry come out of the arena with an expression that was, Harry noticed it from across the distance, processed it quickly, filed it, deeply thoughtful. Not alarmed. Not the warm concern of someone relieved that their student was safe. Something more calculated than that. The scores came, 9s across the board from every judge except Karkaroff, who gave Harry a 7 with the particular calculation of someone managing a competitor standing in a tournament that he cared about for reasons that had nothing to do with the competition. Harry looked at the 7 from Karkaroff and felt approximately nothing. He had the golden egg and he had 31 chains worth of context for what scores meant in a system other people were running, and neither of those things included much space for caring what Igor Karkaroff thought. Parseltongue, Hermione said, when he reached the tent. She'd somehow gotten in, she had, Harry had long noticed, a talent for being in rooms where technically she shouldn't be that rivaled his own. You talked to it. Yes. You've never done that with an animal before. Not deliberately. No, Harry said. I didn't know I was going to. It just, he paused. It felt like the right tool. It was extraordinary, Fleur said. She was standing close enough that he was acutely aware of her, and her expression had resolved from its earlier complexity into something cleaner, admiration, unqualified, with nothing underneath it that complicated it. Completely extraordinary. The warming charm, Victor said, from the corner. On the real eggs. That was the key. That is what stopped it. Showing it I wasn't a threat to its young, Harry said. Yes. Victor looked at him steadily. The rest was power. That part was intelligence. He paused. Both, together, that is what is dangerous. Harry looked at the golden egg in his hands. He turned it once, feeling its weight, its warmth. Dumbledore was watching me, he said. Not to anyone specifically. Just naming it. The tent was quiet for a moment. He was, Remus said, from the entrance. He'd been outside, positioned at the edge of the Champions area, technically not supposed to be there and clearly not caring about that at this point. He came in fully and stood near Harry, and his voice was quiet and very careful. His expression when you came out of the arena, he knows something changed, Harry said. He knows considerably more than something changed, Remus said. He watched that arena. He was there when you performed a fully voluntary Parseltongue communication and then retrieved the egg without casting a single combat spell. He is, Remus chose his words, he is reassessing. Good, Harry said. Harry, we have the meeting tomorrow morning, Harry said. We agreed. Day after the suppressor comes off plus 12 days. Today was the 12th. He looked at Remus. I'm ready. I know you're ready, Remus said. I want you to know that walking into that meeting tomorrow, you should expect him to try to regain control of the narrative. He is very good at that. He has been doing it since before your parents were born. He will be warm, he will be concerned, he will try to manage me, Harry said. Yes. Harry looked at the egg. Then at Remus. Then at the people around him, Hermione with her books, Cedric with his easy straightforward presence, Victor with his careful assessment, Fleur with her chin up and her eyes direct. Adelaide in the doorway behind Remus, serene and still and ready. Let him try, Harry said. He set the golden egg down on the table and looked at the tent wall, beyond which the crowd was still making noise and the judges were discussing scores and the Triwizard tournament was continuing in the direction it had been pointed since before Harry arrived. In the morning he would walk into Dumbledore's office. Not as the boy in the cupboard. Not as the grateful, manageable, cage-shaped thing that had been constructed and maintained and deployed for 14 years. Not as the 30% version, the suppressed and bound and directed version, the version that had been built with care by someone who understood that a boy who didn't know his own power was a boy you could keep. He would walk in as himself. All of himself. He picked up the golden egg again and turned it in his hands and thought, tomorrow. The fire in the Champions' tent burned low and warm, and outside the Hungarian Horntail was being walked back to its enclosure by 6 handlers, and somewhere in the castle Albus Dumbledore sat in his tower and thought very hard about what he had just watched a 14-year-old boy do in an arena full of dragons and noise and fear. And felt, for the first time in a long time, something he had not felt since 1945. Uncertainty. Chapter 5. The names on the chains. Dumbledore's office smelled of old books and lemon drops and the particular kind of warm authority that Harry had spent 3 years finding deeply reassuring. He noticed that now. The smell was deliberate, in a way, not magically manufactured, but curated the way theatrical sets were curated, everything chosen to produce a specific emotional response. The portraits of former headmasters dozing in their frames. The silver instruments on their delicate tables, spinning softly. Fawkes on his perch, head tucked, feathers the specific warm red of a fire that had been burning long enough to become comfortable. Every element of the room said, "You are safe here. You are known here. The person who sits behind that desk loves you and is older and wiser than you and you should listen to him." Harry sat in the chair across from the desk and felt none of it. Not because he'd decided to feel nothing. Because the 7 behavioral bindings that had been mediating his response to this space were gone, and without them the room was simply a room. Impressive, certainly. Full of genuine history and genuine magical power. But a room whose atmospheric design he could now see clearly, the way you see a magic trick clearly once you know where the misdirection is. Dumbledore came in from the door behind the desk. He was wearing deep blue robes with silver embroidery, his half-moon glasses sitting precisely on the bridge of his nose, his long white beard immaculate. He looked exactly like what he was, the most powerful and most respected magical authority in Britain, possibly in the world, who had defeated Grindelwald and mentored kings and built an institution of resistance that had stood against Voldemort. He also looked like a man who had spent the night recalculating. "Harry," he said, and the warmth in his voice was genuine. That was the most disorienting thing, it was completely genuine. He sat down behind the desk and looked at Harry with those bright blue eyes, and the warmth in them was real, and Harry held both things simultaneously, the genuine affection and the 5 bindings, the genuine care and the vault theft, the real love that did not excuse a single thing. "Professor," Harry said. "I wanted to see you after the first task," Dumbledore said. "To check in. Yesterday was remarkable. You handled yourself with extraordinary composure." "Thank you." "The Parseltongue was inspired," Dumbledore said. He leaned back slightly, crossing his long fingers on the desk. "I don't believe anyone has ever approached the dragon task that way. Your instincts continue to surprise me." Harry looked at him. He didn't smile. He didn't match the warmth. Not rudely, just neutrally, the way you look at someone when you're listening carefully and have decided that your own effect in this conversation is going to be determined by what's actually said rather than by an ambient desire to make the other person comfortable. Dumbledore noticed. Something small moved through his expression. Very small, gone quickly. "You asked to see me," Harry said. McGonagall said, "At your convenience." "What did you want to discuss?" "Several things," Dumbledore said. "Primarily I wanted to make sure you were well. The tournament takes a toll, and you have had," he paused, choosing the word with the precision of a man who chose every word, "an unusual few weeks." "Unusual," Harry said. The blue eyes were very steady. "I have also been meaning to speak with you about the second task. There are things you should know, going forward, about what will be required, Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. "I'd like to have a different conversation from the one you're planning," Harry said. His voice was level. Completely, specifically level, not aggressive, not trembling, not performing anything. Just the honest register of someone who has decided that a particular social performance is no longer available to them. "I'd like to talk about the examination that was conducted on me 11 days ago." The office was very quiet. One of the silver instruments spun on its table and produced a small chime that neither of them acknowledged. "I'm not sure I know what examination you're referring to," Dumbledore said. "The diagnostic assessment," Harry said. "Conducted by Adelaide Delacour, Healer Seer of the Delacour family line, and Ragnarok Ironteeth, Senior Cursebreaker of the Gringotts High Vault Authority." He watched Dumbledore's face as he said these names, and what he saw there was, briefly, an unguarded response, a very slight tightening around the eyes that was gone in a moment but had been there. "The assessment that identified 31 soul bindings on my person. Including 5 that bear your magical signature." Dumbledore did not move. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded and his blue eyes on Harry, and he was doing what powerful men do when they are surprised in a territory they consider their own. He was reassessing with great speed while maintaining an expression of almost absolute calm. "Harry," he said, after a moment, and his voice had shifted. Still warm, but the warmth had a new quality in it, the specific warmth of someone preparing to explain something difficult to someone they believe, still, they can guide through it. "I imagine what you've been told is true," Harry said. "All of it. I've had the diagnostic repeated twice by different practitioners since the first assessment. The findings are consistent. Ragnarok has submitted a formal report to the Gringotts High Vault Authority and the ICW Rights Division. Adelaide Delacour has filed documentation with the European Magical Medical Authority and with Madame Bones at the MLE. He held Dumbledore's gaze. There is a legal case in progress. Multiple jurisdictions. I am aware of everything that has been found, and I am aware of the specific attribution of each binding by magical signature. A pause. Fawkes shifted on his perch. The instrument spun. I see, Dumbledore said. He took a breath that was so controlled it was almost invisible. Then you know that my intentions were what? Harry asked. Protective, Dumbledore said, and the word came out carrying genuine weight, genuine belief, the absolute conviction of a man who has carried something for 14 years and still believes in the morning that he did the right thing. Harry. Everything I did was to protect you. The world you were born into, the situation you were born into, required 60 to 70% of my magical capacity, Harry said. You required me to have 60 to 70% of my magical capacity suppressed. For my protection. You were a child, Dumbledore said, and his voice was still gentle. A very powerful child, in a very dangerous world, with a target on you from the moment you survived. The suppressor was placed when I was 1 year old, Harry said. On an infant. Who was about to be left with muggles who hated magic. He let that land. Which you also arranged. The blood protection was real, Harry said. I know. Lily's sacrifice, the protection in Petunia's blood. Real, legitimate, necessary. I understand that. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. That's not why you left me there. The blood protection would have worked anywhere within Petunia's proximity. I could have been raised 2 streets away by a magical family and still had access to it. You left me in that specific house with those specific people because you wanted me, shaped. By them. By that environment. Dumbledore was quiet. You used my aunt, Harry said. As a vehicle for 2 bindings. Including a shame construct. Which made me feel wrong for being magical. Which made me feel like I deserved what they did to me. His voice did not shake. He had processed this for 11 days and the processing was complete and what was left was simply the fact of it, clear and immovable. You used her hatred of magic as a weapon against me. I used every tool available to ensure your survival, Dumbledore said, and there was something cracking slightly in his voice now, not performance, not manipulation, but the genuine sound of a man confronting what his convictions have actually cost. The binding was designed to keep you beneath notice. Magic that expressed freely in a Muggle household would have drawn attention. Would have brought danger. The shame construct wasn't designed to reduce magical expression, Harry said. Ragnarok mapped it. Its function was emotional, not practical. It was designed to make me feel ashamed of what I was. That is not a safety measure. That is a character modification. Silence. What was the plan? Harry asked. He wasn't performing anger. He was asking. Genuinely, directly, the question that had been sitting in the center of everything for 11 days and that he had decided he was going to ask to Dumbledore's face in this room and receive an answer to. What was I for? In the long run. What was the plan for Harry Potter? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes were doing something complicated, there was grief in them, genuine grief, and something else. The something else was the thing Harry was watching. You were the only one who could stop him, Dumbledore said quietly. The prophecy, I know about the prophecy, Harry said. Hermione found 3 documented copies in the Department of Mysteries registry. The one that was made to you and the 2 sealed versions. He paused. The prophecy says the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It doesn't say anything about the one with 60% of his power locked behind a binding. It doesn't say anything about a managed, grateful, obedient boy who does what he's told. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You weren't protecting me. You were preparing me. And you built a specific version of me to be prepared. Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted. Not capitulation, the man was not built for capitulation in any simple sense. But a recognition. The specific look of someone who has always known, somewhere deep down, what the truth was, and has been shown that another person knows it too. You were always going to be in danger, Dumbledore said. From the moment of the prophecy. Everything I did, was your decision, Harry said. Made about my life. Without my knowledge or consent or the knowledge or consent of anyone who was actually mine. He leaned forward slightly. Where is the rest of my inheritance? The vault audit found the withdrawals. I want a full accounting. Another silence. Longer. The war, Dumbledore said, required resources that, was any of it my decision? You were an infant. I'm not an infant now, Harry said. And I've been 14 for a while, and during that entire time you have been sitting on funds that belong to my family and using them for purposes I was never informed about and never consented to. He sat back. The legal case covers this also. Gringotts is filing under the unauthorized vault access statutes. I understand there are penalties. Dumbledore looked at him. For a moment, a very brief moment, Harry saw something in the old man's face that he had never seen there before. Not in 3 years of knowing him, not through any conversation or crisis or moment of gravity. He saw Dumbledore genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. The chess player looking at a board that had changed configuration while he was watching another game. You have been busy, Dumbledore said. Quietly. Without accusation. I have, Harry said. I had a lot of time to catch up on. Fawkes made a sound from his perch. Not musical, just present, the sound of a creature acknowledging something important was happening in its vicinity. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice had changed again, stripped now of the conversational management, something more direct and more honest and more tired. I need you to understand that Voldemort's return, is real, Harry said. I know. I've known all year. The tournament was designed to deliver me to him, whoever put my name in the goblet was working for him. I know that. I'm not ignorant of the threat. He held the old man's gaze. I am going to deal with Voldemort. That hasn't changed. What has changed is how. And on whose terms. His return will require, my involvement, Harry said. Yes. Not my management. My involvement. There's a difference, and the difference matters. Dumbledore was quiet. The bindings, Harry said. The remaining ones, there are still the 2 unclassified, and the Horcrux in my scar. Ragnarok is confident the Horcrux can be removed. I want to discuss, the Horcrux. Dumbledore said it very quietly, and the word came out with a weight that confirmed, completely, that he had known. Had known what was in Harry's scar. Had known for years. Harry had suspected this since Ragnarok had named it, had been almost certain of it, but the certainty landing fully now produced a specific quality of silence. You knew, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. And to his credit, to whatever credit was still available to him, he did not attempt to soften it or explain it away. I knew. How long? Since your 2nd year, Dumbledore said. The diary, Tom Riddle's diary. The way it functioned. It confirmed a theory I had been developing. My 2nd year, Harry said. I've been carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head since I was 1 year old and you have known about it since I was 12. He breathed. And you said nothing. The implications of removal are being actively worked through by Ragnarok and Adelaide Delacour, Harry said. Who are not managing the information based on what they think I can handle. Who are treating me like a person rather than a piece on a board. He stood up. He was done sitting. Not out of anger exactly, out of the simple physical expression of having reached the end of a specific kind of patience. I'm going to have the Horcrux removed. The legal case is proceeding. The bindings that are left are being cleared on a schedule that Ragnarok has prepared. I'm competing in the tournament on my own terms because I've chosen to, not because I'm trapped. He looked at Dumbledore. I'm not going to stop you from doing whatever you're doing about Voldemort, Harry said. Whatever order you're rebuilding, whatever preparations you're making. That work matters and I'm not here to sabotage it. He paused. But I'm not going to be managed by you anymore. I'm not going to be a piece on anyone's board. I will deal with Voldemort because it needs to be done and because I'm capable of doing it. But I'll do it as myself. All of myself. He walked to the door. Harry. He stopped. Turned. Dumbledore was still sitting behind his desk, and he looked old, in a way he hadn't looked when Harry walked in. Not physically diminished, but reduced in some other dimension, the way a person looks when the architecture of something they've maintained for a long time comes down. I did love you, Dumbledore said. Whatever I did love you. I want you to know that. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He held the statement against the full weight of everything, the 5 bindings, the vault theft, the Shane construct, the Horcrux he'd known about for 2 years. He held all of it in the same moment as the genuine grief in those blue eyes and the real truth that those two things were both true simultaneously and that their simultaneous truth was the most difficult and most human thing about all of it. I know, Harry said. That's what makes it complicated. He went out. He went directly from Dumbledore's office to the 4th floor and then, without thinking about it, past the 4th floor and up 2 more sets of stairs to the astronomy tower, which was empty at this hour, and he stood at the top of it with the November wind coming off the mountains and looked out at the grounds for a long time. Remus found him there 20 minutes later. How did he take it? Remus asked, coming to stand beside him. He didn't try to deny it, Harry said. He explained it. The protection rationale. The wartime necessity framing. He paused. He knew about the Horcrux since my 2nd year. Remus made a sound that was entirely involuntary and entirely unlike him. Then he was quiet for a long moment, gripping the tower railing with both hands. He knew, Remus said. Not a question. 2nd year. The diary confirmed a theory he'd had since I survived. And he didn't, Remus stopped. He didn't tell you. He didn't, he stopped again. When he spoke next, his voice had that specific quality it got when he was managing something large and choosing very carefully how much of it to let out. What are you feeling? Harry considered the question. The wind off the mountains was cold and clean and carried something of the lake in it. I keep trying to find the place where I'm supposed to be more devastated, he said. And I can't find it. Not because I'm not, I am. It's real, what he did. I know it's real. But I've spent 11 days building something with people who actually looked at me and told me the truth, and that, he paused, that takes up more space than the grief. The fact that it's possible. That it actually happened. That I can stand here with the whole picture. Remus looked at him. Sirius is going to be devastated, Harry said. Sirius is going to attempt to duel Albus Dumbledore, Remus said. I am going to prevent him from doing that. With difficulty. Tell him, Harry started. Tell him the legal case is real and it's proceeding and that Dumbledore answering for this in a court of law, in front of the ICW, on the record, that is more meaningful than a duel in a corridor. Tell him that's what I want. I will tell him, Remus said. He will not fully believe it immediately. But I will tell him. He looked at Harry. For what it's worth, watching you walk into that office this morning, your father went to his grave never having the chance to stand up to a man who failed him in a serious way. You got to do it at 14. He paused. I think he would have found that remarkable. You keep saying things like that, Harry said. Because they keep being true. They stood on the tower for a while in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the air. Below, the grounds went about their business. Students crossing the courtyards. The lake still and silver. The Beauxbatons carriage pulled up at the edge of the grounds like a powder blue landmark. Ragnar found the missing signature, Harry said. Remus turned. The one that wasn't in the Gringotts registry, Harry said. He identified it this morning, before the meeting. He came and told me before I went up. He looked at Remus. It's in the registry now. It was removed from the registry, which as Ragnar explained is technically impossible, but was done by someone with sufficient institutional access to arrange it. He paused. The signature belongs to Cornelius Fudge. Remus stared at him. The Minister for Magic. Has one binding on me, Harry said. A single binding. Placed 4 years ago, the summer before 3rd year. A monitoring and influence binding keyed specifically to my perception of ministry authority and ministry communications. He held Remus's gaze. Meaning any communication from or about the ministry, official letters, public statements, direct interactions, passed through a filter that made me more receptive and less critical than I would naturally have been. Fudge, Remus said slowly. Working with Dumbledore, or independently? Ragnar isn't sure yet, Harry said. The binding style is different from Dumbledore's work. Different methodology. It's possible Fudge placed it on his own initiative, for his own reasons. It's also possible he was asked. He paused. Either way, the Minister for Magic has an illegal binding on me. Which Adelaide has now included in the ICW filing, alongside everything else. Remus sat down on the tower steps. He pressed both hands to his face for a moment, then took them away and looked at the sky. The Minister for Magic, he said again, as if repetition might make it more comprehensible. The Ministry has been blocking Sirius's trial for 3 years, Harry said. Fudge specifically. Every time Dumbledore could have pushed harder for a formal hearing, the Ministry has found administrative reasons to delay. And every time I've felt a vague sense that questioning Ministry decisions was slightly uncomfortable, he stopped. The binding. Merlin, Remus said. It's in Madame Bones's filing now, Harry said. She's not Fudge's ally. She doesn't owe him anything. She follows evidence. He looked at Remus. Ragnar says that a Minister for Magic placing an illegal binding on a private citizen, regardless of that citizen's particular significance, is grounds for immediate removal from office under the Ministerial Conduct Charter. Remus looked up at him. You're going to bring down the Minister for Magic. The evidence is doing that, Harry said. I'm just, not stopping it. Remus laughed. It came out slightly helpless, the laugh of someone who has reached the outer limit of what they expected and is making peace with the fact that the expected was always too small. Sirius, he said. When I tell Sirius about Fudge, please ensure he's nowhere near anything breakable when you do it, Harry said. The whole cottage is potentially breakable when Sirius is involved, Remus said. But I'll do my best. Harry's pocket vibrated. He pulled out a small mirror, one Ragnar had provided, linked to a twin in the 4th floor room, their communication system for the duration of the process. Ragnar's face in the mirror. The 2 unclassified bindings, Ragnar said, without preamble. I have completed the analysis. Harry put the mirror against his ear on instinct and then held it out so Remus could hear too. Tell me. The first, Ragnar said, is a sacrificial anchor. It is designed to, in specific circumstances, in a specific type of magical confrontation with the soul fragment currently residing in your scar, ensure that the confrontation produces a specific outcome. The binding is attached to the fragment, not to you directly. It is designed to ensure the fragment can be cleanly separated from you at the moment of a high-intensity magical conflict. He paused. In plain terms, it is a contingency binding. If you were ever in a direct confrontation with Voldemort at close range and the fragment was active, it would separate, Harry said. And the fragment would be destroyed in the confrontation rather than pulling you with it, Ragnar said. It is, technically, a protective binding. A safety mechanism for the Horcrux removal scenario. Whose signature? Harry asked. Lily Potter's, Ragnar said quietly. Harry stood very still on the tower. Your mother, Ragnar said. The night she died. She knew about the fragment. I don't know how, possibly she identified it in the days before, possibly she was told, possibly she understood in the moment what Voldemort's curse had produced. But she built a contingency. If you ever faced him directly and the fragment became active, this binding would ensure you survived the separation. The wind off the mountains moved Harry's hair. He looked at the lake. His mother. In the minutes or hours before she died, she had known what was in his scar. And she had done what she could. Not just the sacrifice, the love that made him untouchable to Voldemort's touch, but this, something specific, something technically sophisticated, something that said, if it comes to the worst, here is the additional layer I'm giving you. She was extraordinary, Remus said, very softly. Yeah, Harry said. His voice was rougher than he'd intended. He breathed through it. The second unclassified binding. A pause from Ragnar. Longer than his pauses usually were. This one, Ragnar said, is the most complex binding I have encountered in 300 years of practice. I have been analyzing it for 6 days. I brought in 3 colleagues from the High Vault Authority, under a sealed consultation, they corroborated my findings. Another pause. It is not a binding that was placed on you by another person. Then what is it? It is a binding you placed on yourself, Ragnar said. On the night of the curse. When you were 1 year old. Harry said nothing. The magical theory, Ragnar said, is contested in the academic literature. But the evidence in your case is unambiguous. When the killing curse struck you and your mother's protective sacrifice activated, the collision of those two forces produced a surge of magical energy in your core that was, by our measurement, off any scale we have records for. Your magical core, in that instant, was fully expressed for the only time in your life before this week. And in that expression, he stopped. What? Harry said. You made a choice, Ragnar said. A 1-year-old child made a binding choice that is architecturally more sophisticated than anything I can explain through conventional magical development. You chose to anchor yourself. To the world. To the living. The binding is a will anchor, it attaches your magical core, your life force, to an ongoing intention. He paused once more. The intention reads, in the binding's magical language, as something close to, not finished. Not done. Will return. The tower was silent. At 1 year old, Harry said. At 1 year old, Ragnar confirmed. Whatever you are, Mr. Potter, whatever the true measure of it is, you have apparently always known, on the level that precedes language and conscious thought, that you were not done. Harry stood on the astronomy tower with the November wind in his face and the full weight of everything, his mother's contingency binding, his own infant will anchor, 31 chains, and the hands that had placed them, the face of Dumbledore acknowledging what he'd done, the sound of Voldemort's name attached to a fragment in his own scar, the golden egg in the chest back in his dormitory, the 12 green-white lights that had crossed the ceiling of the room of requirement, and he felt. Underneath all of it, something that he recognized from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. It felt like himself. Is the anchor binding a problem? He asked. No, Ragnar said. It is not removable, it is not external, it is yours, it grew from your own core, but it requires no removal. It is, if anything, the most structurally sound thing in your entire magical architecture. It has been holding everything else together. A beat. I believe it is partly why you have survived everything you've survived. Keep it, Harry said. Of course, Ragnar said. It was always yours. Harry put the mirror away. He looked at Remus, who was sitting on the tower steps and not trying to produce a useful expression and was simply sitting with it, the way Remus did things when they were too large for efficient processing. 2 weeks, Harry said. The Horcrux removal. Ragnar says 2 weeks to prepare properly. And Voldemort's other Horcruxes? Remus asked. There will be others. If he made one deliberately, the diary, I know, Harry said. Hermione's been researching. We think there are at least 5. Possibly 6. He paused. Ragnarok has agreed to help map them. He says Gringotts has objects in their high-security vaults that match the profile. He won't tell me what they are yet, he's confirming first, but he says within the month. You're going to go after them, Remus said. Yes, Harry said simply. Not now. In order. But yes. Remus looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, brushed off his robes, and said, with the understated certainty of someone who has made a decision that doesn't require a lot of words, I'm in. I know you are, Harry said. Sirius will be, unbearably enthusiastic, Harry said. Yes, Remus agreed. We'll manage him. They came down from the tower together, back into the castle's warmth, back into the ordinary noise of Hogwarts between classes, students passing in corridors, a distant argument about Quidditch, the smell of someone's potions experiment going slightly wrong 2 floors down. The world continuing its ordinary operations. Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his mind clear and his full power settled in him like something that had always been waiting for exactly this, and the list of names, Dumbledore, Pettigrew, Snape, Molly Weasley, Fudge, and the fragment in his scar that wore his enemy's face, was not a weight he was carrying. It was a list he was working through. Methodically. On his terms. With his people. He turned the corner to the 4th floor and the door of the room was open and through it he could hear Hermione and Fleur in a rapid debate about the legal precedent for ICW intervention in cases of ministerial magical misconduct, with Victor contributing occasional single sentences that somehow consistently landed on the precise point that advanced the argument, and Cedric making tea with the focused tranquility of someone who had decided his role in this particular ward council was thermal support. Ragnarok was at the table with his folio open, writing with the fast precise strokes of someone on the right side of a problem. Harry came in. The conversation paused. 5 faces turned toward him. The meeting with Dumbledore? Hermione asked. Done, Harry said. He knows we know everything. He didn't deny it. He crossed to the table and sat. Ragnarok, I want to schedule the Horcrux removal. And I want to talk about the vault audit timeline. And, he looked at Hermione, I want to review what you found on the Ministerial Conduct Charter, because we need to make sure the Fudge filing is airtight before Adelaide submits it to the ICW. Hermione opened her notebook. I have 17 relevant statutes and 4 precedent cases. Of course you do, Cedric said, not unkindly. Start with the most compelling, Harry said. They're all compelling, Hermione said. Then start with the first, Harry said. We have time. Fleur looked at him from across the table. She'd been watching him since he came in, and her expression had that quality it got when she was processing something she'd decided about, and she held his gaze for a moment with a directness that had its own kind of weight. He didn't break you, she said. Not a question. A statement of what she'd read in his face. No, Harry said. Good, she said. Simply. Then she looked back at the documents in front of her, and the debate resumed, and the fire burned, and the work continued. Outside the room, the castle went about its November. The lake lay flat and cold. The mountains were dark against a sky going grey toward evening. And somewhere in his tower, Albus Dumbledore sat with his half-moon glasses and his quiet instruments and his genuine grief and his genuine responsibility, and thought about a 14-year-old boy who had sat across from him that morning and shown him clearly, without cruelty and without mercy, the exact weight of what the greater good had cost. And somewhere to the north, Sirius Black received Remus's letter and read it twice and then, after a silence that Remus described in his next letter as geologically significant, said, he faced Dumbledore alone. He did, Remus confirmed. At 14. Yes. Another silence. Then, James would have been completely insufferable about this. He would have, Remus agreed. I'm going to be insufferable about this, Sirius said. I know, Remus said. I've prepared myself. Chapter 6, 31. The Horcrux removal happened on a Tuesday. Ragnarok had spent 14 days preparing for it with the methodical intensity of someone who understood that this particular working had no precedent exactly matching Harry's case, which meant every decision had to be made on first principles, cross-referenced against the two closest historical analogues he'd found, and verified against Adelaide's diagnostic readings 3 separate times before anything touched the actual structure. He'd also brought reinforcements. 2 goblins arrived from Gringotts on the Monday before the removal, senior colleagues from the High Vault Authority, both older than Ragnarok, both carrying the particular weathered gravity of very long lives spent doing difficult things with precision. Ragnarok introduced them as Brasswick and Thorncoil and offered no further biographical information, which Harry took to mean they were serious enough that no further biographical information was required. They examined his scar for 2 hours, communicated with Ragnarok in rapid gobbledygook, and left without much ceremony. Ragnarok came to Harry afterward and said that their assessment confirmed his own and they had signed off on the removal sequence. Signed off, Harry said. As in they approved the approach. As in, Ragnarok said, if something goes wrong, they have formally agreed that I followed correct procedure. It is a professional certification. He paused. Nothing will go wrong. You said that with the power suppressor too. And nothing went wrong, Ragnarok said. The ceiling was fine. Harry considered this. Fair. The room the requirement provided this time was different from what it had given them for the suppressor. For the suppressor it had given them space, high ceilings, room for the discharge to move, a kind of workshop largeness. For the Horcrux removal it gave them something smaller and more specific, a room that felt almost like the interior of something alive, walls curved slightly, lit by a warm sourceless light that had no discernible origin and didn't flicker. The air in it was very still. Not stale, still, in the way the air feels in very old places that have been kept carefully intact. The castle's cooperating, Hermione said, standing in the doorway. It always has been, Harry said. The circle Ragnarok drew for this working was different too. Smaller. More complex. The script on the floor was in 3 languages simultaneously, gobbledygook, pre-Norman French that Adelaide had contributed to the design, and something else that Ragnarok simply called the Old Tongue and did not elaborate on. The absorption posts were replaced by something more delicate, 12 shallow basins of hammered silver arranged at the circle's points, each one containing water that had been prepared by Adelaide over the previous 3 days with a process Harry had watched parts of and found simultaneously fascinating and impossible to follow. The basins receive and neutralize, Ragnarok explained. The fragment must be drawn out intact and then dissolved. It cannot simply be destroyed in place, the risk of collateral damage to the surrounding soul matrix is too high. He looked at Harry. This will feel different from the suppressor. The suppressor was yours, releasing it was releasing part of yourself. This is not yours. This is something foreign that has been resident for 13 years and has developed integration threads. Drawing it out will feel like separation. How bad? Harry asked. Significant discomfort, Ragnarok said. Not physical pain, precisely. Something more like, the feeling of remembering something important that you've been trying to forget. A kind of recognition, followed by loss. He paused. The fragment is not benign. It is a piece of Voldemort's soul, and it will resist extraction. You may feel things that are not yours, impressions, images, emotional states that belong to the fragment rather than to you. The important thing is not to engage with them. Let them pass through. Like meditation, Harry said. I don't know what that is, Ragnarok said. Just going to let things pass through, Harry said. Yes. I can do that. The people in the room for the Horcrux removal were fewer than for the suppressor. Ragnarok and Adelaide inside the circle's working area. Outside its perimeter, Fleur, Hermione, Remus. That was all. Harry had chosen them, specifically and intentionally, for the same reason he'd chosen them for every significant thing of the past 3 weeks. They were the people whose presence he felt as straightforwardly steadying rather than complicated, and for this particular working he wanted uncomplicated. Cedric had understood without being told and had said, "I'll be right outside the door." Victor had done the same thing with fewer words. Sirius was not there. Harry had spoken to him through the two-way mirror the evening before, a long conversation that had been raw in the specific way that conversations between people who care genuinely about each other and have been navigating enormous things separately tend to be raw. Sirius had wanted to be there. Harry had said he needed Sirius to be exactly where he was, safe, hidden, not in a position where the event of a Horcrux removal at Hogwarts becoming known might bring Aurors to an address and catch them both in an impossible position. Sirius had argued. Harry had listened to all of it, and then had said, "The thing in my scar has been there my whole life, and you not being present when it leaves doesn't change anything between us. You being caught changes everything." A silence through the mirror. "Right," Sirius had said. And then, gruffly, "Be careful." "I'm going to be fine," Harry said. "I know you are," Sirius said. "You're annoyingly competent. Be careful anyway." Harry had laughed. It had been a real laugh, full and genuine, and Sirius's face in the mirror had done something at the sound of it, something that was less about the laugh specifically and more about the recognition that the person producing it was intact. Was himself. All of himself. After this, Sirius had said, I want to see you. When this is done and the legal work is moving and the second task is handled and the world is slightly less on fire, I want to actually see you." After this, Harry had confirmed. He sat in the chair at the center of the circle now, the basins of silver water arranged around him in the warm still light, and looked at the ceiling of the room of requirement, a plain curved ceiling that reflected the sourceless light back in even warmth, and thought about 13 years. The scar on his forehead had been part of his face his entire life. Part of how he was recognized, part of what made people's eyes jump when they met him, part of the dreams and the inexplicable connections and the moments of knowledge that shouldn't have been available to him and were. Part of him, in the most literal possible sense, woven into his neural landscape and his magical architecture and his experience of being himself. And it was a wound. It had always been a wound. A thing done to him by violence that had stayed and stayed. He thought about being ready to let it go. He was. "Harry," Adelaide said. He looked at her. "Whatever you feel during this, emotions, impressions, memories that don't belong to you, you know they're not yours. You hold that knowledge clearly and everything else passes." "I know what's mine," Harry said. She nodded. Placed her fingertips at his temples, the familiar warmth of her touch, the specific quality of her presence that was simultaneously that of a healer and a grandmother and a seer, all three integrated. Ragnarok took his position at the circle's edge, the black stone instrument in one hand and a new instrument in the other, something that looked like a compass but opened in 3 dimensions, a sphere of dark wire that held the black crystal needle at its center. He held it at the level of Harry's scar. The needle moved toward the scar and stayed there, oriented with the precision of an instrument that had found its specific target. "Begin," Ragnarok said. The extraction process had 12 steps, like the suppressor, but where the suppressor's steps had been mechanical, a sequence of structural dismantling, bolts withdrawn in order, these were different. The first step produced nothing Harry could physically feel but produced a change in the room's atmosphere, a kind of heightening, like the moment when the lights in a theater dim before the curtain rises. The second step produced the first impression. It was not his. It came from the scar, from the fragment, from the piece of soul that had been resident in his forehead since the night it was deposited there by a curse that had shattered the soul that produced it. And what came was, not language, not a proper memory, but something more primitive, a sensation of cold, of enormity, of the particular quality that Harry had always associated with Voldemort's presence without ever having a word for it, and underneath that, going deeper, something more surprising. Fear. Not his fear. The fragments. The small shred of a fractured soul clinging to the warm living thing it had attached itself to because the alternative was the void, and the void was what it most dreaded, and now the warm living thing was evicting it, and the fragment was afraid with the specific animal desperation of something that knows it cannot survive what's coming. Harry felt this and thought, this is not mine. And it passed. Steps 3 through 7 were progressively more intense. The impressions came faster, less controlled, flashes of something that might have been memory or might have been pure emotional residue, the psychic fingerprints of a life lived in the pursuit of deathlessness, a life characterized by the specific horror of someone so afraid of dying that they'd done everything else wrong. There were moments in it that were just cold. There were moments in it that were just hunger, a specific magical hunger that had nothing to do with food. There was one brief overwhelming flash of something that might have been joy, a long time ago, before everything else, someone young who had not yet become what they became, and that was the strangest thing of all, that fragment of something almost human, and Harry let it pass with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite relief. Not mine, he thought, steadily. None of it mine. Between each step Ragnarok paused. Harry breathed. The silver basins around the circle's edge stirred slightly at each step, the prepared water absorbing the loosening integration threads, the dissolution mechanism doing its designed work. Fleur was very still at the perimeter. Harry could see her in his peripheral vision without looking at her, and her stillness was the kind that took effort, the held stillness of someone who wants to move and has chosen not to. Hermione had both hands pressed flat on her thighs and her eyes were fully open, and she was doing the thing she did in genuinely tense situations where she needed to think. Her lips were moving slightly, silently, something that might have been counting or might have been an internal recitation of useful information. Remus was standing with one hand against the curved wall and his eyes on Harry with the complete attention of someone who has decided that the most useful thing they can do right now is simply witness. Step 8, Ragnarok said. The 8th step was when the fragment began to come loose. Harry felt it the way Ragnarok had described, not like pain, but like separation. Like something that had been integrated into the texture of how he felt himself for his entire life was detaching, and the detachment was not violent, because Ragnarok was preventing it from being violent, but it was real, and the realness of it produced a specific sensation that he had no framework for because there was no framework for it, it had never happened before. It was the first and only time this was going to happen. It felt like an ending. And like a beginning. Both simultaneously, inseparably. He thought about the infant in the house in Godric's Hollow who had chosen not finished, not done, will return, who had anchored himself to the world by pure will without language or consciousness to support that will, and he thought, I'm still here. The anchor held. The 9th step. The 10th. Adelaide's hands were trembling slightly at his temples, not from weakness, from the precise controlled effort of someone maintaining a necessary pressure against something that was pushing back. The fragment was resisting. Not intelligently, the fragment had no real intelligence of its own, being only a shard and not a whole, but with the blind insistence of something that knew it needed the host and did not want to leave. Harry thought at it, without words, in the language below language, you are not welcome here. You were never welcome here. Whatever you are, whatever he is, you don't belong in me. You never did. And felt it, the fragment felt it. Felt the difference between 13 years of residing in a consciousness that didn't know it was there and the full presence of that same consciousness, fully expressed, full power, full self, looking directly at it and saying no. The fragment had never encountered this before. It came loose. Not gradually. Not through the final 2 steps, it simply released, with the completeness of something that had been shown it was outstayed, and the sensation of it leaving was extraordinary and immediate, a clearing like the moment between lightning and thunder when the world holds still, and Harry felt the scar on his forehead, for the first time in his entire life, go quiet. Not just the fragment leaving. The wound itself, the original wound, responding to the removal of the thing that had been keeping it half open since the night it was made. Going quiet. Going still. Ragnarok moved through the 11th and 12th steps with swift precision, the sphere compass tracking the fragment as it drifted free and the silver basins drawing it in, the prepared water receiving it and beginning the dissolution working that Adelaide had designed over 3 days of careful preparation. The fragment moved through the water like ink dropped in a glass, spreading, diffusing, losing coherence, becoming less and less until the water that contained it was simply water again. Clean. Ragnar held the sphere compass over the final basin and watched the needle. The needle, for the first time since he'd calibrated it to Harry's scar, pointed away. He looked up. Harry was sitting in the chair with his hands loose in his lap and his eyes open and his face doing something that had no precise emotional taxonomy. It was too large and too multiple for single-word description, what was on Harry Potter's face in the moment after a 13-year-old fragment of Voldemort's soul was removed from his forehead. The scar was still there. It would always be there, the physical mark of what had happened. But it was just a scar now. Just a shape on skin. Nothing active, nothing present, nothing looking out through it at the world. Adelaide lifted her hands from his temples. She stepped back and stood straight and looked at him with the expression she'd had when she'd made the note in her private journal on the first night, the expression of someone who has seen something they will think about for years. "Done," she said. Quietly. Harry breathed. In the room, the held breath quality broke. Hermione let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh and sat down heavily on the nearest surface. Remus leaned against the curved wall and put his hand over his face and stayed like that for a moment. Fleur crossed the perimeter of the circle without hesitating and stood in front of Harry and looked at his face, at the scar, at his eyes, at the full unobstructed expression of him, and something moved through her expression that she let be visible, the same way she'd let things be visible in the room of requirement on the morning of the suppressor. "How do you feel?" she asked. Harry looked at her. He sat with the question for a genuine moment, actually checking, actually going through the internal landscape with the new accuracy of someone who now knew what was his and what wasn't and could tell the difference. "Quiet," he said. "In my head. Just, quiet." He paused. "I didn't know it was always there. The noise. Some kind of low-level presence that I thought was just, me. The way my mind worked. I thought it was just part of being me." He looked at his hands. "It's gone." "Yes," she said. "It's just me," he said. "Just you," she said. He met her eyes and held them for a moment, and the moment had a quality to it that was specific and clear and acknowledged by both of them without either of them saying anything further about it, and it would be addressed, it was going to be addressed, at some point soon in the natural way of things that have been building in honest increments over 3 weeks of shared significant experience, but not right now, because right now they had work to finish. "Ragnar," Harry said, turning to the goblin. Ragnar was already writing. He looked up. "The Voldemort Horcruxes," Harry said. "The ones in Gringotts vaults. What can you tell me?" Ragnar closed the folio and opened a different one. "Gringotts holds one object that matches the Horcrux profile," he said. "A cup. Helga Hufflepuff's cup, held in the Lestrange family vault. Acquisition date approximately 1946, deposited under false provenance documentation." He looked at Harry. "There is also a locket. Not currently in Gringotts, it was removed from the Black family vault in 1979. Traced by our records to a location in the north of England, a property called Grimmauld Place." Remus stood straight. "Sirius's house," he said. "Yes. If Sirius knew there was a Horcrux in his house," Remus started. "He doesn't," Harry said. "Nobody told him what to look for." He looked at Ragnar. "Are there others?" "A diary that we know is already destroyed, good. A ring, believed to be the Gaunt family signet, last traced to a property in Little Hangleton. A diadem, the records here are historical, it was lost centuries ago, but there are references that suggest it was recovered and hidden within the last 50 years. He paused. "And a snake." "Nagini," Harry said. "Yes. A living Horcrux, the most dangerous kind, because it cannot be retrieved and held. It must be addressed at the source. Harry looked at the list. 6 Horcruxes known, the diary already destroyed, by him, in second year, without knowing what he was doing. 5 remaining. 4 retrievable objects and a snake. He thought, this is what comes next. Not immediately, there were still things in progress, legal things, the tournament's remaining tasks, the months-long architecture of the ICW case that Adelaide was building brick by brick. But this was the shape of it. This was what the year was for. The cup in Gringotts, he said. What's the process for accessing the Lestrange vault? Illegal, under conventional circumstances, Ragnarok said. Under Goblin law, however, an object held in a vault that was deposited under fraudulent provenance can be confiscated by the High Vault Authority for examination. If the examination confirms the object is a dark artifact classified under Goblin treaty law, he paused, confiscation becomes legal and mandatory. Which means the High Vault Authority could remove it from the Lestrange vault. If they had sufficient evidence to initiate a confiscation examination, Ragnarok said. He looked at Harry steadily. I am, as it happens, a senior officer of the High Vault Authority. I have the authority to initiate such an examination on my own signature. He paused. I simply need the documentation. How long to prepare the documentation? Hermione asked. She'd been listening from her seat on the floor, notebook open, pencil moving. She looked up. 1 week, Ragnarok said. I'll help with the research framework, Hermione said. The fraudulent provenance documentation, if the acquisition records show discrepancies consistent with a forged provenance chain, they do, Ragnarok said. I confirmed it last week. He looked at Hermione with the particular expression he reserved for people who were useful in specific and predictable ways. Your contribution would accelerate the legal documentation significantly. Then let's start today, Hermione said. After a meal, Adelaide said firmly. She had been quietly gathering her instruments from the circle, moving with the deliberate care of someone who knew that the moment after significant magical work was not the moment for strategic planning, and was choosing to say so. All of you. Food, rest, at least 2 hours of neither sitting in this room nor discussing Horcruxes before you resume. She looked at Harry specifically. Your magical system has just undergone the most significant working of the past 3 weeks. It requires recovery time. I feel fine, Harry said. You feel fine because your body hasn't fully processed what just happened, she said. In 2 hours you will feel considerably more tired than fine. Eat before that happens. Harry looked at her. He thought about arguing. He thought about the last 3 weeks and the number of times she'd told him something he didn't want to hear that had turned out to be precisely correct. 2 hours, he said. Thank you, she said. They came out of the room of requirement into the 7th floor corridor in the early afternoon, and the castle received them with its ordinary Tuesday business, a pair of second years arguing about transfiguration at the corridor's far end, someone's exploding snap game audible from a room nearby, the smell of the Tuesday lunch still faintly present from the floors below. Harry walked through it and felt his own quiet like a new room he hadn't known was there. No noise from the scar. No low-level presence. No fragment of someone else's fear or hunger or cold running underneath the normal texture of his thoughts. Just him. He thought, I should find something to eat and sit somewhere with windows. He thought, Fleur likes that window seat on the 5th floor that looks over the lake. He thought, I'm going to ask if she wants company. He found her already heading toward that corridor, as it turned out, with the automatic ease of people who have been moving in natural convergence for 3 weeks, and he fell into step beside her without particular ceremony. The window seat, he asked. Obviously, she said. They got food from a house elf. Fleur requested it in French and received it in seconds, which said something interesting about the house elves' attitude toward Beauxbatons students that Harry filed for later, and they went to the 5th floor window seat and sat in the afternoon light with sandwiches and tea, and the lake outside was steel blue and the mountains beyond it were the dark slate of late November, and it was genuinely one of the nicer moments Harry had experienced in recent memory. The second task, Fleur said, after a while. 3 weeks, Harry said. I heard it involves something taken from each champion, she said. Something important to them. She looked at him sideways. The assumption is that you have no one important enough to serve as the taken thing. People keep making that assumption, Harry said. Yes, she said. They're wrong, of course. They are, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. I will not be taken as your important thing, she said. Just to be clear. I refuse on principle to be anyone's passive device in a tournament narrative. Harry looked at her. I have no idea who they're taking, he said. But, noted. It will probably be Weasley, she said. The red one. Your friend. Ron, Harry said. He talks about you constantly, Fleur said. In a way that manages to be both sincere and slightly exhausting. That's Ron, Harry said. His loyalty to you is very genuine, Fleur said. She said it carefully, and he understood what she was doing, threading the needle of the complicated thing, the binding and what was real underneath the binding, the question of what survived the removal and the answer that had been, most of it. I know, Harry said. I think I'd have liked the Weasleys anyway. Without the binding. I think they're just, actually that. What they seem like. Probably, she said. Magical assistants or not, it's hard to manufacture that much chaos authentically. He laughed. She smiled. Below, the lake caught the afternoon light and threw it back in long oblique flashes. My grandmother is leaving at the end of the week, Fleur said. She's filed everything that needs filing. The ICW Rights Division has opened a formal investigation, I heard this morning, she told me before the working. She paused. The investigation covers the full findings. All 31 bindings, the vault theft, the fudge monitoring binding, the Horcrux. The ICW has issued formal requests for documentation from the Ministry, Dumbledore personally, and Gringotts. Formal requests, Harry said. With a 30-day response deadline, Fleur said. Non-compliance is a separate violation. They can't ignore it. Fudge will try, Harry said. He'll fail, Fleur said. My grandmother has a relationship with the ICW Rights Division that goes back 30 years. She doesn't file things that go nowhere. She looked at him. And Madame Bones has filed her own parallel investigation through the MLE. 2 simultaneous investigations, Ministry and ICW, covering the same violations. She paused. It is, as Ragnarok described it, extremely bad positioning for anyone named in both filings. Dumbledore is going to try to manage the narrative, Harry said. He's good at that. He'll present himself as someone who made difficult decisions in wartime with the best available information. The binding evidence doesn't care about his framing, Fleur said. Magical signature analysis is not subject to interpretation. It says what it says. She held his gaze. And you are not the only one he managed, Harry. The ICW investigation will find others. People who were bound, directed, whose lives were shaped by his architecture of control without their knowledge. When those people come forward, the case builds, Harry said. Yes. He looked at the lake. He's not a monster, he said. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He genuinely believes, that what he was doing was necessary. That the greater good justified it. He paused. Which might actually be more frightening than if he were just a monster. Monsters don't convince you they're right. Genuinely motivated people do. Yes, Fleur said. It is the thing my grandmother says about the resistance. More dangerous than a man who does evil for pleasure is a man who does evil because he is convinced of his own righteousness. She paused. He will need to face what he did in a court of law, with evidence, on the record. That is both appropriate and necessary. Yes, Harry said. And after that? Harry thought about it. After that, I don't know. That's the first time in a while I've thought about after that and not immediately known the next step. He considered. That's probably healthy. Probably, she agreed. They sat in the window for a while longer, in the comfortable way they'd developed over the past 3 weeks. The silence between them was not empty, it was the full silence of two people whose company doesn't require constant filling, who had learned each other's rhythms in circumstances that had accelerated the process considerably. After the tournament, Harry said. She looked at him. I'd like to, not do this. He gestured, indicating approximately the window and the lake and the general situation of two people sitting together. In a tournament context. In crisis context. I'd like to do this when we're not managing a legal case and Horcrux extraction and Dumbledore simultaneously. Fleur looked at him with the careful directness she reserved for things she was taking seriously. That is a reasonable request, she said. I'm not asking for anything specific, he said. I just want there to be an after. Where we see what this is when it's not all of this. I am also not opposed to an after, she said. For the record. Good, Harry said. Good, she said. Below them the lake moved in the November light, and after a moment Fleur said, You should know that Beauxbatons is not that far from London by Portkey, in case the geography of an after requires consideration. I'll keep that in mind, Harry said. She looked forward, out the window, and her expression was doing something she wasn't managing, something that was simply there, satisfied, and quietly glad, and looking at a future that was more open than it had been 3 weeks ago. Harry looked at the same view and felt the same thing. That evening, he went to Dumbledore's office. Not because he was summoned. Because he chose to. He knocked. Entered. The old man was at his desk, looking older than he had on the morning of the meeting, carrying something that had settled into him in the days since, not guilt, exactly. Recognition. The specific weight of a man who has seen himself clearly, perhaps for the first time in a long time, and has not turned away from what he saw. Harry, he said. Professor, Harry said. He stood in the center of the office. He did not sit. The Horcrux is gone. Dumbledore was very still. Something moved through his face. When? This morning, Harry said. Ragnarok and Adelaide. It went cleanly. He paused. I wanted you to know. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. There are others, Harry said. 5 more. I know where some of them are. I'm going after them. That is, Dumbledore started. Not something I need permission for, Harry said. Not unkindly. Simply accurately. I'm telling you because we both want the same outcome with Voldemort, and working against each other in that specific pursuit would be counterproductive, and I'm not interested in counterproductive. He held the old man's gaze. I'm also telling you because, he paused, and what came next was something he'd been working toward for 3 weeks, through the anger and the catalogue and the complicated grief of dismantling the life he'd thought he'd understood. I don't want to become someone who can't tell the difference between the person who harmed them and the person who is asking for a second chance. That distinction matters. Dumbledore looked at him. You harmed me, Harry said. Significantly. With genuine belief in your own justifications. The legal case is going forward and I'm not stopping it. You'll answer for what you did in the appropriate forums and that's right and necessary. He breathed. And you know things about Voldemort that I need. And I know things now that you don't. And if we work separately, people die who don't have to die. What are you proposing? Dumbledore asked. Information exchange, Harry said. Not management. Not me receiving your plans and following them. An exchange, you tell me what you know, I tell you what we've found, and we each make our own decisions about what to do with it. He paused. On equal terms. You are 14 years old, Dumbledore said. I am 14 years old with my full magical capacity, a legal case in progress against you and the Minister for Magic, a team of people who have dismantled every mechanism you put in place to control me, and the knowledge of where at least 2 of Voldemort's Horcruxes are." Harry's voice was even. "I'm not asking you to pretend I'm a peer in life experience. I'm asking you to deal with me honestly. On what I actually am." A long silence. "The ring," Dumbledore said quietly. "In Little Hangleton. There is something you should know about it before you approach it." He folded his hands on the desk. "It is not simply a Horcrux. It bears the Resurrection Stone. It is one of 3 Deathly Hallows, and it carries a curse on it that—" He paused, and looked at his own hand, and Harry noticed for the first time that the right hand looked wrong. Slightly darkened at the fingertips, as if it had been touched by something cold. "A curse I have already begun to contract, through my own foolishness in handling it without proper precaution." Harry looked at the hand. Then at Dumbledore's face. "How long?" he asked. "A year," Dumbledore said. "Perhaps a little more. Adelaide Delacour would know better than I." Harry stood with this. The anger that was always available to him about Dumbledore didn't surge, it was present, but it had long since become specific rather than ambient, and this moment was not one of those targets. This was something else. This was an old man who had made a choice that was going to kill him and was choosing to be honest about it. "I'll ask her to look at it," Harry said. "You don't, I know I don't have to," Harry said. "I'm doing it anyway." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Because I am not you. I don't build a version of people that serves my purposes and then discard the rest. You made choices about my life that were wrong. That doesn't mean I make the same choice about yours." Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. "I should tell you about the Hallows," he said finally. "Everything I know." "Yes," Harry said. "You should." He sat down, then. In the chair across from the desk. The office with its spinning instruments and its dozing portraits and its smell of lemon drops and old knowledge. The fire burning low and warm. And Albus Dumbledore, who had built 31 chains and who was dying from his own carelessness and who had genuinely loved the boy he'd spent 14 years managing, told Harry Potter the truth. All of it. The Hallows, the prophecy's full text, the Order of the Phoenix's history, the horrors of Tom Riddle's early life that had shaped what he became. The locations of known Death Eater strongholds. The contingencies that had been prepared in the event of Voldemort's return. Everything. It took 2 hours. When it was done, Harry sat with it all for a moment. Then he stood. "Thank you," he said. And meant it, in the specific and accurate way that didn't require either of them to pretend the history between them was uncomplicated. "Harry," Dumbledore said, when he reached the door. He turned. The old man looked at him across the warm office. He looked, in this light, like exactly what he was, someone very old who had done enormous good and enormous harm in the same lifetime, with the same pair of hands, from the same place of genuine if catastrophically overreaching conviction. "I am sorry," Dumbledore said. Not as an explanation. Not as a justification. Simply, "I am sorry." Harry looked at him. "I know," he said. He went out. The corridor outside was empty and quiet, the particular quiet of Hogwarts in the evening when most people were at dinner or in their common rooms, and Harry stood in it for a moment and let the conversation settle into the part of himself where he was putting things that had been finished. Not forgiven, exactly. Not forgotten. But completed. Filed in the place where completed things go, and the space that had been occupied by carrying it reopened for what came next. He went down to dinner. The great hall was warm and noisy and smelled of roast something, and the 4 tables were doing what they always did, 1,000 simultaneous conversations, students moving and arguing and laughing. Harry came in and sat down at the Gryffindor table and Ron passed him the bread without being asked and Ginny was telling Fred some increasingly implausible story and Hermione arrived 30 seconds later with her books and the expression of someone who had just thought of 3 things she needed to write down before they escaped her. Normal. Except that nothing was the same, and that was fine, because normal had never been what he was made for, it was what had been constructed around him to keep him contained, and the thing about being uncontained was that the ordinary world didn't disappear, it just fit differently, with room around the edges for who he actually was. He looked across the hall. At the Beauxbatons table, Fleur was listening to something one of her classmates was saying with the politely impatient expression she used when she was thinking about something else. As if sensing the attention, she glanced across the hall. Found Harry's eyes. He tilted his head slightly. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Both of them looked away. Both of them were almost smiling. "You're in a good mood," Ron said, looking at him with the sharp attention of someone who had known Harry for 3 years and noticed when something was different. "Am I?" Harry said. "You don't usually look like that at dinner." "Like what?" "I don't know," Ron said. Like you're actually here." Harry looked at Ron. At his best friend, whose mother had placed an illegal loyalty binding on Harry and whose loyalty itself had survived the removal of that binding intact and genuine and clearly his own. Whose company Harry had valued for 3 years and would value going forward for reasons that were entirely his. "I am, actually," Harry said. "Here." Ron looked slightly uncertain about this as a conversational development. "Right," he said. "Good. Pass the peas." Harry passed the peas. Hermione opened one of her notebooks and showed him a page of legal citations and he leaned over to read them, and Fred and George started an argument 3 seats down about something involving a fanged frisbee, and Ginny's implausible story reached an increasingly implausible climax, and Neville knocked over his pumpkin juice and apologized to it, and the noise of the hall went on and on over all of it like something that had always been there and would always be there, the ordinary, magnificent noise of people being alive. Harry ate his dinner. Later that week, Ragnarok would initiate the confiscation examination of the Hufflepuff Cup. 2 weeks after that, Sirius and Remus would search Grimmauld Place from top to bottom and find the locket in the drawing room cabinet, which Sirius would spend 3 hours trying to destroy by every method available to him before Ragnarok arrived and did it properly in 11 minutes, which Sirius would be annoyed about for some time. The ICW investigation would produce, over the following months, a formal finding against Dumbledore, a separate finding against Cornelius Fudge that would end his tenure as Minister for Magic, and the beginnings of a broader inquiry into the use of binding magic against British magical citizens over the previous 15 years. Sirius would receive his formal hearing in January, conducted before the full Wisingamot with Ragnarok's financial evidence and Adelaide's medical testimony, and would walk out a free man into the winter air looking simultaneously stunned and ferociously glad. The remaining Horcruxes would each have their own story. The ring in Little Hangleton would be retrieved carefully, its curse contained by methods that Adelaide and Ragnarok developed together, and Dumbledore's hand would not worsen beyond what had already been contracted. The diadem would be found in the Room of Requirement itself, in a place Harry had walked past a dozen times and never looked directly at. Nagini would be the last and most difficult, and that would be its own long chapter. Voldemort would return. That was always coming, always written in the architecture of the thing, and when it came, Harry Potter would meet it as himself, full power, clear mind, surrounded by people who had chosen him without binding or architecture or the careful management of a man who loved him and controlled him in the same breath. He would not be alone. He would not be afraid. He would not be manageable. But that was later. Tonight he was at dinner in the Great Hall with his friends, and the scar on his forehead was just a scar, and the 31 chains were gone, and what was left was simply, entirely, completely himself. That was enough. It was, he thought, more than enough. It was everything.